open up. I mean, especially while we're working through audio issues, but I can't think of any that are appropriate for human beings right now. Maybe Wyatt.
Probably.
I didn't mean that Wyatt was the joke. I thought maybe you'd have one, but apparently not. I was hoping.
Oh, no, nothing offhand. Can you see like our logo behind me, or do you just see the red ring?
I just see the red rings.
Yeah, I don't know why it's doing that.
So how did we do it? How did we change the parts game? Let me take you back to the beginning. The introduction.
Oh,
we're live.
Oh,
You see like our logo.
are we live?
We're on. This is
Oh, good.
YouTube.
Fantastic.
Well,
Here we are in
we're all set
reality.
now.
Here we go. Welcome to the first live podcast from the TorqueKingTV studios. Yeah, little technical difficulties here. We haven't quite got everything figured out, but we'll get there. So we've got another podcast about NV4500 stuff. We've got Wyatt here with long range gear, and Andrew will be joining us shortly, hopefully.
Yes.
We've also got a video playing, our original VSG 1003 service guide for the NV4500. Just as a little background teaser, I guess. So, Wyatt, should we get started?
Yeah, we can get started. Should we do kind of we're waiting on Andrew. Should we do maybe like a quick recap of part one, or any of the key points we should hit on that?
Yeah. Let me get that. Was anything from that old list on here?
Nope, it's all new.
Okay, so what I've got is all new stuff, but we can go over kind of the highlights of, well, Chris, you probably remember a little better than I do. We'll throw you under the bus for this one.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll take it. Bus never hurt me. Let's see. Without having it all in front of me, basically we went over quite a lot on that 4500. We had questions about switching output shafts. What are the things you want to switch the most? There's so many questions, it's hard to narrow it down to just one thing. But if we start with just one thing, there we go. Andrew, can you hear us?
Hey there.
Fantastic. What would you
come through all right?
What would you say? Yeah, we're hearing you. We're live right now.
We're live.
Ooh, all right. Sorry about that. I had to scramble to get set up here. It wasn't quite working out my original spot.
You got the appropriate background there with the transmission transfer case parts in the back there. It's perfect.
Oh yeah, I guess I do. How's
Nice.
it going, guys?
Good.
All right.
So we got the original video that Dan did, putting the transmission, pulling it apart and putting it back together, that we've got available to go right along with our original kit. Playing in the background right now, and I mean, we could look at that for any time that we're looking for something else to talk about on the 4500. Trying to review from last podcast we did. Andrew, what was the main point that you remember sticking out for the primary podcast there on the 4500?
Well, we hit a whole bunch of really good stuff. I don't know, I think we talked a bunch about oil, and I think I harped on the cast iron tail housings for 6 years.
How important end play setting is on these, and making sure that end play is set, your sealants, making sure not to use too much RTV or switch to anaerobics in a few areas. Also making sure to use Loctite on a lot of the hardware that go into these, so they don't just kind of back out on their own. I think those are a lot of the key points. I know we talked about like the full spline main shafts and fifth gear nut fixes and stuff along those talking points. And obviously you guys have all those parts in stock and tons of information on your website that people can go find.
Yeah, there's enough information on the website you can read for an hour or two, just going through from one piece to the next. If you're looking at the 4500 main kit for a Dodge, for instance, you can go in and you can look at all of our exploded views. You can look at each piece has got tech notes under it, what it's for, what you should get with it, a lot of that stuff. And all of that was written in-house. All of that's all done here. So we've got a lot of information there. There's a whole lot to take in. If somebody is watching and wondering, I was reading this, I was reading that, and they're still a little confused on something, call us. We'll be happy to help you out. But Andrew raised a great point, the oils, different oils to use. And Wyatt, you were giving us some pretty good information on the reason that certain oils work and certain don't. And just this week we had on the 4500 Facebook group, a guy was asking, 3-4 times about it, just using ATF plus 4 in a little Toyota behind a 4-cylinder. He's definitely not going to throw the kind of torque at it like we're doing with the Cummins engine. He's got a doubler on it, so he's barely moving that transmission. And he was curious about just using ATF plus 4 and had every kind of opinion thrown at him. What do you guys think about that?
Yes, it depends. Well, it depends on what that transmission is. I don't know. I'm assuming it's probably run with brass synchros in it.
I believe he was still using the regular synchros, but it was an NV4500 behind that little
it was a
4-cylinder Toyota. Yeah,
I gotcha. I haven't looked. I don't know if the ATF is compatible with the carbon line synchros and how that exactly works. I still couldn't really see a case where you would benefit necessarily from the ATF other than it's going to, the thinner the fluid, the more, or rather the less parasitic drivetrain losses you're going to have. So unless you're trying to meet maximum MPG or some sort of like horsepower goal, I can't see that instance really falling into that category. You're going to be better off with a thicker gear oil versus an ATF. It's going to protect the actual gears themselves since they are meshed gears. It's not like, automatic where it's applying clutches and stuff of that nature.
I think the ATF emerged like as an option here because Dodge just decided to not carry the correct fluid, and they say to put ATF in all their gearboxes now, which is ridiculous.
Specifically the ATF plus 4, and that is different than regular Dexron Mercon or the Ford fluids as well.
Yeah, so they're saying the ATF plus 4 for both 4500s and 5600s is because they're just freaking lazy and pinching pennies and being ridiculous.
That tends to be my opinion as well.
Actually, there's a really good, let me jump in. There's a really good podcast. I think it was the Diesel podcast where they had, it was one of the guys, I think it was from Hot Shot Secrets. I want to say it was that company. I think it was that company. Anyway, if you look it up, they talk about different oils and additives and stuff, but there's a key point where they discuss G56 was always set up as an ATF plus 4 transmission, and people complain about poor shifting quality, lots of gear noise, just general dissatisfaction. And so that company came up with kind of more of a standard, it's more gear oil based than like an ATF solution for the G56s. And the G56s are similar in like the 5600s, where, Redline MTL is kind of something that we recommend over the ATF style. I don't know necessarily what the properties are. I haven't looked at them as far as the Hot Shots oil. I'd be curious to try in a G56, but as far as a 4500 is concerned, I think there's better oils out there. And unless you plan on totally sticking it in to try it out and pull it out and rebuild it yourself, like Andrew and I have kind of experienced trying different oils. It's a pretty big undertaking to pull everything back apart and replace your synchros when they get glazed or something else happens inside the transmission.
I'd have to agree with you there.
Yeah,
just pulling the
especially
transmission apart and swapping out the synchros is involved enough, but it's really not that bad. It's the whole get the truck up, get the transmission out, get everything out of the way so you can get the transmission out. Did you go mudding in the meantime? What else have we got in the way? It's everything that's attached to it. So that to me at least is why it's better to just do it right the first time, and that's why we run the red line.
And it's not even, with the ATF +4 and Dodge being, the way they are and recommending that's not even necessarily that much cheaper of an like if we were talking, the crazy Walmart ATF stuff he wants to run just to save money and have availability. I mean, obviously I don't recommend it either way, but the ATF +4 isn't even that much cheaper than a good MT85, right? I mean, it's
not for a good ATS +4. I agree. I even looked at it considering it myself.
Yeah, we're not talking about a substantial savings. It's just pointless to not just run the right stuff. And I've noticed in not just like diesel stuff, but especially Harleys, it's really bad. But any sort of like niche, there's always like a core group that's like only do what the factory recommends and not one other thing at all ever. And that's fine. I understand the intent behind that. The problem is that they don't understand that maybe engineers might be trying to save money or take an easier route or simpler route, or they have directions, that may not be the most beneficial from higher up, whatever. I don't know why I could attest to how that all worked better.
Yeah, one phrase, value engineering, that has been thrown around ever since like probably the 60s. I had to go and deal with that at companies in the past where, you have a solution that is going to work really well, and inevitably, upper management always wants it done cheaper, or it needs to be faster, or the per unit cost needs to be lower. So it's, how can we sit down and make this meet the requirements that we're trying to set forth without overshooting it too much, and then kind of go from there. And it's the same thing, like no manufacturer large scale is going to be profitable if they make something that, is so overbuilt, never breaks down. If Dodge made these transmissions and if they made a truck that would stay together for 1 million miles, they would have never sold more of them. So it doesn't.
Exactly. And they're always looking to sell more new vehicles too.
Yeah. It's in every industry. I was actually just kind of off topic a little bit, just watched a documentary about, it sounds pretty lame. It was about the light bulb manufacturers back in the 30s.
This is such a wild story.
I know. And basically the average lifespan was increasing to the point where worldwide incandescent light bulb sales were dropping. And so the Philips, Sylvania, all the major companies back in the 30s got together, and they actually formed a contract that the average lifespan shall be X number of hours. And then if a company made theirs that went over that on whatever independent testing they agreed to, the other companies would fine that individual. So it kept everyone in check. And then the incandescent light bulb industry is kind of, doesn't really matter. Well, now it's all gone basically. But at the time, 40s and 50s, didn't really matter what manufacturer you went with. If it was one of the big ones, they all kind of lasted right around the same length. But it's things like that, yeah, just because it's the OEM doesn't necessarily mean it's the best. And in fact, it's usually, a few steps away from being the best because of
usually substantial compromise.
Yeah, absolutely.
We only, like, if somebody buys a transmission from us, we say this is the one and only fluid you will use. And we're referring to Redline MT85, by the way. It has a distinct smell, right? We can kind of tell if you were listening to us or not. But it's funny.
Yeah, it
you
actually
see
smells kind of nice.
Yeah, it does actually. You see the what fluid in my 4500 question 3 or 4 times a week, and like some of the crap that I see, a lot of the people answering that question are like, you know, I'm guessing half of them don't have NV4500s, and most of them are talking about like, well, this straight 90 weight works in my SM465. It should work in the 4500 just fine. And then you get recommendations like that, just baseless. And I don't know of a reputable builder or a supply house or anything that would recommend anything other than the Redline or the AMSOIL. I mean, do you guys find that, is that an incorrect statement from your guys' perspective?
That's about what we've seen too. You get that every once in a while, you'll see that royal purple equivalent thrown in there too.
Yeah.
But for the most part, we don't see recommendations for anything else but those.
So if all the pros and the guys that are building, the guys that have stake in making sure that their transmissions last are all saying these two, I just don't understand why this debate continues to go on. But if anybody's listening that is curious right now, Redline MT85 is what we recommend. We know what TorqueKing recommends, and both short term and long. Like you throw it in, you'll instantly notice a difference. Within a few miles if you've been running something else. But long term, it is a very premium synthetic fluid that works very well with the the modern replacement synchronizers. And I double check with all of our customers that buy a transmission or a rebuild from us. Once they get it in, I like to keep tabs with them, like touch base and say, hey, how'd the install go? How's it? How's your first drive? And then I'll touch base with them a few weeks later, like, hey, how's it going? What's your, how do you like the transmission? That kind of a thing. And I just 100% of the time I get, man, this ship's like butter. That's almost like unanimously the phrase that is used too. So we are very, very firm on our recommendation for oil. So yeah.
Yeah, and I want to add one thing to that for oils. MT85. That's what we say, that if someone has an issue and it's going to come up as a warranty concern, we mandate MT85 in the 4500s. But if someone has a 4500 that currently has shifting issues because of a different oil or really old oil that's now, gone, basically, putting MT85 in may help, but it's kind of a band-aid. Once the damage to the synchronizers are done, if they're glazed or worn via age or the wrong oils, then you're kind of stuck. At that point, you really need to look at a rebuild. And I think that's where some of the people that try some of these, like the Redline fluids, they try it and didn't like how it shifts, or it still shifts like crap. And it's like, well, it's not on a fresh transmission. It's kind of probably has had the damage done to it. So it's a little too late.
We've found in past experience that if somebody puts the wrong oil in and they notice it right away, which sometimes if it used to have the right oil in it, it'd take a while to bleed out of that carbon material. If they notice it and then they do an oil change relatively quickly, as long as it's not a super high mileage transmission or something, a lot of times it can be saved. But, in most cases, yeah, it does require a little more in-depth to correct that.
Absolutely.
So Jesse or Wyatt, can either of you guys tell me what is it in the MT85 fluid? What is it that is affected on the synchro? Is it the
magic?
The synchro
It's
mesh?
magic. It's absolute magic.
The mesh material, the carbon fiber, or is it the brass aligning with the rest of the transmission parts?
I think it's mostly the fiber material, because the full brass synchros, you can run whatever oil you want in them and they don't care. And Wyatt, you might know a little more the physics of the angles of the synchros or something, why they're so finicky. That's really all I can come up with.
So I'm not really sure why the carbon ones can be more finicky. On the topic of the brass, though, you still have to be careful to get an oil that is actually yellow metal compatible,
Right.
to not eat the brass. We had, if you go to our YouTube channel, there's a short video where we had tried, what was that, Redline lightweight or ultra lightweight?
Yeah, Smurf Blood, the lightweight shockproof.
Yeah, so the lightweight shockproof Redline. Another builder locally was telling people to run that in their transmissions, and so we tried it in one of our own just to see, and it put a true film over the carbon material, and as that spun, you can, I think even if we were to clean it off, like it's still much smoother. That level of friction isn't there anymore. So even if it was cleaned, I don't think it'll still grab like it was new.
Yeah, no, those were totally glazed, and the film, like when you're cooking up bacon or whatever, and if you leave it to cool off and it turns into that like paste, that's exactly what it was like. The consistency was exactly like bacon grease, and I mean, it's Redline stuff. So I know that I've read a couple breakdowns of the sciencey, the recipe that they do. They have really, really high levels, like abnormally high levels of a few, like, I don't know, moly and zinc or whatever. I don't do science like Wyatt does science, but it's still a fairly light gear oil in terms of gear oils, but it's got a huge number of additives that seem to really help. That's why it's so expensive, number one, but it's worth it.
Yeah, and that's kind of the big thing. A lot of oils out there come from the same place or the same stock oil, and then it goes to a lubricants factory, and then it's mainly the differences come in and whatever the specified additive packages are, whether it's detergents or any of the other, zinc added to it, friction modifiers, stuff of that nature is all spec'd by the manufacturer. And then they have, a contract with the actual lubricant plant so that obviously they don't spill the recipes out. But things that you would think of that maybe aren't always kind of as they seem. A lot of, as far as like engine oils, there's quite a few competitors that are all actually made by the same parent lubricant company, but it's the sub companies underneath of that or manufacturers that contract with them to make those. So
the base stocks are all made by just like a small portion, right? And then each company kind of adds their own additive recipe and package, correct?
Yep, exactly. Same thing with gasoline, diesel. There's refining requirements. Obviously, every refinery, whether it's Phillips or Shell or what have you, BP, they all have to meet a minimum requirement as far as the properties of the gasoline or the oil that they're sending out. But then everyone always talks about like, Shell with Techron or whatever that is. It's just different additives, and mainly in gasoline, it's just added detergents to it. So, you can get that with a bottle of fuel injector cleaner added to your gasoline instead of paying an extra $1 a gallon. But it's mainly a marketing thing in that sense. But as far as these oils go, so Redline MT85 does have a friction modifier in it. I haven't looked at what exactly it is, but Redline does specify the MT85. It's developed for an NV4500 as well as a few other things, but
yeah, list the compatible factory stuff on the back of it, and it does match the factory required spec for 4500.
So anything else for oil, or have we beat that dead horse pretty well at this point?
I think that horse has breathed its last, but I'm sure that there's people out there that are going to ask more questions. There always is.
Yeah.
And that's understandable. I can understand getting 99% of it. And if there's anybody else out there like myself that is listening most of the way, but thinking a little bit, you miss one or two words and it's easy to miss what happened there. My brain goes off on tangents like that. And I know that happens to more than just me, at least I'm hoping.
I guess
Yeah.
the thing that we could add about that is, we talked about it last time, the coolers, but I don't think we really touched too much on those filtration kits that you guys sell that are pretty sweet. A lot of people, and it seems to be like there's, one, like 50% in one camp, 50% in the other. Some people are actually saying like this fluid is lifetime fluid in your transmission. You don't ever have to change your fluid ever, which is just a absolute garbage.
That just doesn't exist.
Speaking of our YouTube channel, I have a video where I broke down a 5600 that hadn't had its oil changed in a hot minute, and there was all kinds of trash in those passages to where it was actually blocked to the third gear bearing, right? I mean, little examples like that. If you don't change your fluid, you just get all kinds of crap buildup. But at the same time, you don't necessarily need to change it every 10,000 miles either with a good synthetic like Redline. You can last for quite a while. And something that extends it is that the PTO coolers obviously keep the temperature swing from going too high, but the filtration kits are actually kind of neat. Why don't you guys talk about? I'm gonna actually have one on the shelf. I'll show so that people can actually see that it is like sent through that filter.
Yeah. So in the beginning of this NV4500 rebuild video that's playing alongside of us here, you saw that the transmission, when it first got put on the table, actually had the Eaton filter kit in it, which that's discontinued. We did start making a replacement filter for that, and I also have they're 1 7/8 wide coolers,
which we love.
Yeah, more. I made those initially. I made those filters for just to support the old stamped filter housings and not the coolers. They both utilized like what Andrew's showing here, a catch plate and a filter. So these filters are about 3 inches wide, and they have the appropriate filter for it. And oil goes in that little deflector groove there, and it's typically put on the passenger side of the transmission because that's just the best flow for oil. And then it's captured in that cooler housing and enabled for it to go back to the transmission that needs to pass through the filter.
Yeah, so it comes in. I'm gonna put this down. The oil's flowing, and it comes in this little catch right here. Because I mean, until like in years ago, before I actually ever saw one of these things, I just thought that this was suspended in the oil and cool, it just gets splashed. Well, no, it's actually diverted. This goes between the PTO cooler and the case, gets diverted through this little plate here, and then this is mounted and sealed just like this. Well, there you go. So oil has to come in, pass over this filter element, and then out back into the transmission through this hole. So any oil that does come into the PTO cooler area has to go through the filter to get back in, which it's an important distinction versus just it's getting splashed with oil, right? And then obviously there's the cool end plates with the sight plug. That's kind of neat. If you, for some guys who refuse to fix their leaks, this might be beneficial.
Yeah. So the filters we did start making for that Eaton kit actually work great for the guys with big exhaust that can't run that big 3-inch cooler. That I think that's mostly what you have is the 3-inch cooler. Did you get any of the shorter ones?
Oh man,
Yeah,
we love those. Yeah. We love those short ones.
Yeah,
because
so
most of the guys run the 5-inch. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, it just worked out that we previously started making the Eaton filters that were 1 7/8 roughly wide. We got more and more calls for the guys with big exhaust, like you guys probably have. it was pretty easy to come up with a solution for them by just modifying the current production cooler to accept the shorter filter, and then you've got exhaust clearance. So even if you've got a big exhaust, you can still get some cooling benefits on the passenger side, but also retain all of the filtration benefits.
Oh, so you guys actually have a filter kit for the 1 7/8?
We do.
Oh, I didn't even know that. That's kind of cool.
You want me to send you one?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
So what we've been doing is just running that bare 1 7/8 on the passenger side to clear the 5-inch exhaust, and then having this on the driver's side because I didn't know there was another option. Actually, that's pretty cool. I wasn't aware.
Yeah.
That would be beneficial.
It's not as
obviously.
effective with the filter on the passenger or on the driver's side. It will still catch stuff.
Mhm.
But yeah, we'll get you some of those short filters sent out.
That'd be cool.
You can
I
try
need
it
to order
out.
some more. The bigger ones anyway.
Got some in right now, so now's the time.
Yeah.
What else on the list, Wyatt?
Well, I think that touches on kind of the main items. We can go down our talking points for some of the questions that came in for this particular podcast. We just start at the top. Minimum tools for rebuilds. So
That's a great question.
yeah,
Basic
And that
hand
kind
tools
of
for sure.
difference. You want to take it, Andrew? Go ahead.
I was just gonna say basic hand tools, all the standard ones, and then I'm bringing it up because it was literally right in front of me. A 5th gear nut tool. Obviously, this one is modified. This is not what yours is gonna look like. This is my Redneck Engineering.
What did you do to our tool?
Well, now it's a dual purpose one. So now it does 4500s and 5600s, thanks to Torque King and also Carlisle. And it actually works all right. But
Save
yeah,
space
so
in
this
the
is what
toolbox. Yeah.
a 5th gear nut wrench will look like, and then you'll need obviously, so it's a 1/2 inch squares put on them, and you'll need a good sized torque wrench. Just a standard like 0 to 250 foot-pound one will work, and then you can just add a couple more degrees. Excuse me. We also have, because the torque value can get pretty high. We have one of these like big giant 6 foot, like huge 600 foot-pounds. You can do Dana 80 nuts with it as well, but you can do 350 foot-pounds pretty simple with this. Then you also need a small one, a small torque wrench for the tail housing bolts and the top cover bolts, the bearing retainer bolts, the input retainer bolts. Those will have a torque spec that are much lower, so your big 250 foot-pound one won't work. And before anybody says, I don't need that, just tighten them down. Well, just don't. Just listen to me.
Yeah. No, that's how you end up with broken bolts, stripped threads. You can ruin a whole case if you tighten it down too much, because the case isn't made to have 300 foot-pounds on any of those bolts holding the bearing retainers or anything like that. And
guys,
it's real easy to mess up that cast iron.
Yeah, that input retainer, guys that just rip it down with an impact. Well, number one, you're definitely stressing out those tiny little bolts, but number two, you're squishing out all your sealant, both out and in, which is not good. So don't do that. just do the right torque spec. It's not hard.
Yeah, you also need a real key thing is a dial indicator setup with a magnetic base, something that's good and a good sturdy version as well. That's how you're going to test your end play for both your input to main shaft and your counter shafts. You need a race and seal driver set. Probably at least a pretty decent size bearing splitter of some sort. You've got getting the I'm trying to think of what the main shaft rear bearing, getting that off the shaft has to come out. So a bearing splitter or the right tool. I think TorqueKing, you guys actually make a tool for pulling that. As far as bearing drivers, Torque King has a lot of really good drivers that are definitely the way to go. You can probably maybe find some pipe at a hardware store that you could modify to work, but then you risk obviously damaging your bearings in that sense.
So for dial indicator, not everybody has one of those obviously all the time, but this is like a cheap one that you can get these on like Amazon and eBay and all that kind of crap. We like those, we're hard on shit, so we can't like have the super expensive stuff, but just a gear wrench version that's really nice. It's really accurate, repeatable, they last. These little cheap ones off of eBay or Amazon or whatever, they'll break on you. This was in the box, hasn't been touched in a hot minute, but for a guy that's just doing it one time at home, like, I mean, yeah, this would probably work for you, I guess. But
I'll tell you what, I set end play on one time with just a set of dial calipers, or just a regular caliper. Just stuck the end in, pinched either way, and checked it with a caliper, and I got within spec. And when I checked it later, it was within spec.
Yeah.
It did do the trick. It's not nearly as expensive as a dial caliper, but it is a little trickier to get it to work.
yeah, I mean, I think that one or like some equivalent of that on eBay is probably $30 or $40 or something like that.
Right.
I don't.
They're
really
not very
care
expensive for the
measure
cheap
anyway,
ones like
just-
that.
Yeah.
I did want to point out though, Andrew, just because I thought of it while you were showing it there, people need to make sure that they're using that dial caliper right. With the little plunger there, the plunger rod that spins that dial on there and tells you your clearance there. If you don't have that perpendicular to your transmission, if you're off at an angle a little bit, you're going to read a higher number than what's actually happening. And so, I mean, it's trigonometry, and I'd let Wyatt take that for a minute there. But basically, you want to be as straight on with it as you can, because otherwise you're getting the wrong reading.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I know we chatted about that in the last podcast, and something that didn't come up in the last podcast that I thought was a good thing to touch on right now is people breaking input shafts. If you're replacing an input shaft, you're obviously pulling the transmission back out. If you're just swapping the shaft out and then not pulling the tail housing off to then recheck your main shaft end play, you can't necessarily just pull it out and swap a new one in and expect it to be the same. Verifying that is important.
It would be one thing if the end play spec was like a 1/4 inch or something like that, but this is very, very tight tolerances. I don't care what you use or what method, just make sure you measure it and make sure you verify that your end play is correct. It doesn't have to get super expensive. You can get one of these cheapo, dial indicators. I actually really like Tecton torque wrenches. I like Tecton tools in general. But Tecton makes pretty decent torque wrenches that, they have sales and stuff like that all the time. I think you can probably get a pretty good, torque wrench for, under $100. And, obviously if you're rebuilding a transmission, you're probably the kind of guy that would use it again. So make sure you use a torque wrench that will actually give you the right torque specs, and then just even a cheap dial indicator to do it. The spec is 2,000 to 6,000, so it's pretty precise, and you gotta fall in that. I've taken them apart, when end play is just way out of spec, right? I mean, and you're just asking for failure. You're just not, I don't understand why people ignore this, or they just like, oh, I don't need to do that. Well, you do need to do it, because if you want your transmission to last a long time, that's a key measurement. And as long as you do that, you'll probably avoid a lot of shifting issues, a lot of weird noises, a lot of clunkiness, and then later on a lot of breakage. So just do it.
So let's touch on that a little bit more, because I think that is probably one of the biggest things. Is just what you said, that people are going to think it's not that big a deal. I don't really need to worry about the play, and it absolutely is false. You have to take care of that. You have to know that you've got that right. I've had customers talking to me about, so many problems. What are we having problems with this transmission? Why is it kicking out of fifth gear? Why is it kicking out of this gear? Why is it doing that? And it usually comes down to end play or worn parts. I had one particular guy, pardon me, kept popping out of fifth gear. He'd let off the gas under a load and it'd pop out of fifth gear. Talked about lots of different problems that it possibly could be. He finally pulls the back of the transmission off, looking at the fifth gear, and he was able to grab the fifth gear on the counter shaft and wobble it. Like, I know on video this probably looks like a whole lot. That's what it looked like. And what it turned out to be was he had some flat spots on the needle bearings for his fifth gear on the counter shaft. And that was kicking off just enough to the side that it was starting to wear both the fifth gear on the counter shaft and on the main shaft, but it also would kick just enough that it would release and kick right out of fifth gear when he let off of his load. So while he was loaded, everything was tight, staying together, and as soon as he let off, it popped out because it wasn't aligned properly. So it's that kind of a thing in the fifth gear there, but it's all through the whole main shaft as well. If your end play isn't right, you're going to pop out of gears. When you're popping out of gears when you're not supposed to, you're going to grind stuff. You're going to leave more glitter inside the case.
Yeah.
And that's what we want to help people avoid.
Can I do a little demo here? So
Please.
I got just a full spline main and then some destroyed input. Anyway, this will make the point. So when your transmission's assembled, this
Got to
is
lift
in
it
your-
up higher there, Andrew. We can't see it.
Hold it up a little bit. There you go.
Thank you.
So when your transmission's assembled, your main shaft here is just inside of your input there, and there's a bearing that goes in between. The bearing's not installed right now for instructional purposes, but these two are only held together by your bearing retainer on the front, your bearing retainer in the rear. So there's a 2 to 6 thousandths tolerance that this can move back and forth. That includes these together back and forth, right? And that the end plates on both sides are what keep this inserted into here. And your bearing, both your input bearing and the bearing inside here, try to hold this in place. And then the only thing holding this in place is that bearing and the rear one, obviously. So essentially, if you had like a 1/4 inch of end play, your transmission could do this thing, right? Now, if you had a preload, it wouldn't be able to deflect at all. For heat expansion and other reasons, there needs to be some end play, right? for oil clearance and whatnot. So keeping it really tight will help keep this in line. However, when, let's say your end play is 50 thousandths, that means that this shaft can move 50 thousandths back and out of this input and allow for this much deflection, whatever corresponds to 50 thousandths end play. 60 thousandths, 70 thousandths, 80 thousandths. We start splaying pretty far, right? If you see, these teeth are not very tall, right? We don't got a whole lot of wiggle room. We need full flat engagement as designed in order to maintain full strength of our gears. Whereas if this starts lifting up, if this lifts up a couple thousandths, we've got a couple thousandths less gear engagement. And the farther away from like the designed area that the contact patch that's attended, the farther you move up, that stuff gets skinnier and skinnier. If you got just two of the little ends touching and driving all 1,000 foot-pounds of your torque, you're gonna find a weak spot. You're gonna find a weak spot real fast.
Yeah, that's where you find the fuse. That's for sure.
End play is a big deal. It's not.
To keep on the topic of that, it kind of segues nicely into the life expectancy question, which in stock form, these had issues with obviously fifth gear coming off. We see a lot of failures that I would attribute mainly to neglect. Oil ports, especially within the 6 speeds, but like oil ports being clogged, just thick grime buildup. These transmissions in stock form have no coolers, no filters, so they run generally hotter, and obviously if you're loading it more, you're gonna put more heat into it. You're gonna break down that oil more, which I think we had talked about in that last podcast too. But you're having some amount of wear between the gears, the bearings, especially the synchronizers, and unless you change the fluid at some point, you're circulating all of that crap throughout your entire transmission, which is just making the problems worse. So to take, what the life expectancy of one of these would be, I would say best guess, Chrysler probably put them at 150, 200,000 miles. I don't see why that isn't feasible. Under stock conditions, obviously in a diesel with tons of power, it's probably going to be quite a bit less. Towing really heavy, abuse, not changing the oil, just the neglect of that. Also, I know we talked about kind of shock loading the transmission with ceramic clutches, and which you can still do it, just dumping the clutch and getting into it. And that's, every time you do that, it's adding stress and wear to the system. Everything has a fatigue limit, especially steel. Like once you meet that limit, that's when it breaks. So and that kind of touches a little bit onto the benefits of the cryo treatment. Another question that was there is, the cryo treatment kind of goes to help increase that fatigue limit as one of the benefits. It changes the metallurgical properties of the steel itself, but that's kind of where if you're building something or having it built, you really need to weigh what your intended use is for the transmission, as well as the longevity you want out of it. If you want to be cheap and you're okay with building it after 100,000 miles again, because you're kind of hard on it, well, then okay, you can do that. But if you want to spend more money, you're gonna abuse it a bit and want longer life, cryo treatment of the shafts and gears, making sure to use like the red line, keeping good synthetic fresh oil, keeping the coolers on it, help bring those temperatures down. It's kind of a loaded question, the life expectancy. These they're pretty stout little units. They should last a very long time. But a lot of things can go wrong. We've had transmissions come in from other builders that it's kind of where some of our Loctite discussion came in. Things weren't Loctited. End play was atrocious. Countershaft was preloaded, so the bearings were bronzed on the countershaft. Things like that. A bad build obviously will greatly reduce the lifespan of that transmission. So there's a lot of things to kind of keep in mind as far as what they are and what the use is. But I think life expectancy, bone stock standard, fifth gear was never an issue. 150,000 miles at least before any major service is expected, because you're still going to have the friction material within the 4500s, that carbon fiber. The best thing I can compare it to is like the clutches in a rear end or a wet clutch in like an ATV or dirt bike. They are to some level always going to experience wear, and they will eventually need to be replaced. But again, if you're just looking at it mileage wise, someone who's city driving will burn up their synchros, if everything else being equal, way faster than someone who's just cruising constantly on the highway. Like the less shifts that are occurring, the less wear that's going to be happening on those synchros. So
there's to add to what Wyatt's saying, there's a few things, like let's say we put life expectancy at a baseline of 200,000, just for an arbitrary number, just a baseline of 200,000 miles or more, whatever. There's things that guys do to these transmissions that will take that from its optimum, like total max capacity, life expectancy, and chop it severely. It's like, number one, guys that are, really big on swapping the input shafts for bigger clutches. Like, that's good. We love it. We do that ourselves. But throwing on gobs of RTV and you block the oiling passage, which happens like all the freaking time. But that takes your optimum 200,000 mile life and chops it to 150. And arbitrary number, totally made up. But I'm just saying, it takes this optimum amount and chops it. And then when you don't reset end play or don't, set your end play and shim it to get it within spec, and it's actually 50 thousandths, we're going down another 100,000. And then when you don't change your oil ever and put the wrong thing in there to begin with, we're like, we're sort of making this a pointless rebuild, right? I mean, so there's things you have to do to be smart to maintain that maximum life expectancy. And if you do stupid stuff, like load this thing with RTV or like don't check your in play, even the best case scenario is something that will never be attainable for you. So be smart.
On the other end of things, I agree with you guys there, but on the other end of things, for longevity, I had a customer call in this week that was finally going to go ahead and get just a couple of things with his transmission that had 500,000 kilometers on it. I said, well,
So that's like 30,000 miles.
310,685. I just did the conversion. That's what I was looking at down here. So around 310,000 miles. He said it was all shifting pretty good, except for third and fourth was getting where it would grind a little bit sometimes when we go to third and fourth gear. So really, from everything else he described, he was getting a fifth gear nut fix while he was in it because he'd heard it was a big deal. And I thought 310,000 miles, if it hasn't been a big deal yet, it's a good idea to do it now. But that's pretty good lifespan out of a transmission. I said, you must drive that just around town and go get milk and stuff with it. I was just teasing him a little bit. He said, no, I load that thing every day. I'm hauling 10,000 to 15,000 every day.
It's good.
All right.
Good. It means he knows how to drive.
Well, he said he changed his oil on a regular basis. And he always uses the right stuff. That's a pretty good testimony for that stuff as well. And he was just finally going to go ahead and go through it before it got any worse, which I'd have to say is probably the very best thing that anybody can recommend. It started to grind a little bit in third and fourth gear. He said it's only been doing it for a few weeks. I said it's probably a good idea to do it now before it gets worse. And he's going to go through the whole thing.
There you go. So what's next on the list there, Wyatt?
Let me jump back to it. So there's a question that just says modifications.
Cast iron tail housing.
Yeah, cast iron tail housing. Engine
Absolutely.
creates input. If you're rocking a Dodge application, the Chevys, there's not a ton of mods really to do.
Use good bearings and synchronizers. I guess it's not really a mod, but I mean,
Yeah.
make sure you use the good stuff so that.
Cast iron tail housing and coolers is really,
Yeah.
that's it.
And then
Yeah, we do.
Trading mod.
Cryo.
There's not a whole lot of leeway for mods on a manual transmission, really.
No, and there's nothing like for us with the 5600s, we do some oil porting modifications, but within the 4500s,
everything's solid. So
everything's solid besides your fifth gear countershaft gear, but it's a really short run right to those needle bearings. It's not like it's going very far. And the way that's set up, it's not quite as much of an issue. The 4500s, I guess, again, it's not really a mod. The one thing is, we always fill them a quart over the factory spec, fill it up through the shifter hole. Whether you got a round top or square top, doesn't really matter. That's about it for the 4500s as far as the mods go.
if you wanted to, I mean, you can take a square top and put it on top of your round top. Those are interchangeable, and you can have a square top shifter. I know that Core Shifters makes a 4500 shifter, so you can get an actual short shifter thing. They have the cheaper short shifters, but I don't. I don't know. I don't know too much about that one. I've never tried one, but I haven't heard good reviews. However, at least not on the 5600s, 4500s, whatever. But yeah, you can swap that out if you just want a square top shifter for a little bit different options with your shifter. If you have a round top, you're pretty much stuck.
Yeah, and the squares are right out the gate a little bit shorter throw than the round tops, and then obviously we talked about the wear that occurs within the round tops. As far as that goes, I think it kind of, so next question is Dodge and Chevy compatibility, which maybe that would be considered more of a modification, is taking a GM case and basically putting all the Dodge internals to it, I guess, or going back the other way, depending on what your application is. Do you have that number, Andrew, by chance? I don't know if I have it written down anywhere. It's the early GM case, that casting number.
So the early GM, the one that's unique to early GM is like, it's 1.6 something. I think it's 16812. I just remember it as 1.6, and then 1.8, 157. What is it? 23057 and 33096. I think that's, anyway. The first few numbers are the ones I ever remember. 1.6 is GM with the small input bearing retainer journal. The 1.8, 2.3, and 3.3 or 2. Yeah, those are all the ones that are interchangeable between the two.
Yeah, so basically the only one, if you have a Dodge and you want to get a GM transmission to alter, if it's the early GM, you can't do it.
I mean, you probably could. You just end up
without-
spending more money. I mean, you might
Yeah,
as
you
well-
got to bore the front of the case to
Machine
the
modification,
size
yeah.
and drill and tap
And
with a different bolt pattern.
machine shop fees and timelines right now. You might as well just go get a brand new case. The later style cases are still remade. Just go get one of those. It'd be cheaper than paying a machine shop. So,
Well, I've got a project that's coming up right away. I was going to do it way later, but I'm going to do it right away. And I'm going to have it Dodge in the front, Chevy in the rear. And the reason I'm doing that is because I'm putting a 12 valve into an 89 Chevy 1-ton pickup. I was perfectly happy with the gas engine, even though the mileage was horrific. But turns out that engine has to go somewhere else. My son blew motor in his other pickup, so he's getting that one, and I'm going to put the Cummins into the 1-ton Chevy. So in the process, it'll be Chevy or Dodge on the front half of the transmission, but I'm going to put the 32 spline Chevy output on it so that I can maintain the original transfer case, which is a Borg Warner in that particular one. And so I won't have to change any of the transfer case, or I'll probably have to change my drive shafts a little bit, lengthen and shorten them. But I'll have the 5-speed, I'll have the Cummins engine in that truck. And so that's, I think, probably where people are really wondering about interchange and compatibility. As far as everything on the main shaft, with the exception of the balancer on the Chevy main shaft, everything else on the main shaft is interchangeable. Every single piece. You guys know that, but there's everybody that's asking this is wondering what is interchangeable.
Except fifth gear.
Except fifth gear. Fifth gear is different. Everything else is interchangeable. However, you have to make sure that you're still getting the right gearing, because with the early GMs, there is a different third gear on the counter shaft that meets with different third gear on the main shaft if you got the low geared transmission, the earliest of the Chevys. So there still are a few differences, and you can put the early stuff on the late shaft and vice versa, but you got to make sure that whatever you're using matches your counter shaft.
Yeah. What you were talking about, your project that's coming up here, it made me think of a guy who called me 2 days ago and we had a discussion. It's kind of interesting. I've never seen anybody try this before, but he was on a forum and found a new old stock new style GM NV4500. So it was like a 07 whatever, like the last of the runs, right? Never been used before ever, brand new. GM NV4500. He put a Dodge input shaft and the Dodge bell housing to bolt it up to his Cummins. but he was like, well, I don't really want to tear this apart. So he left the tail assembly on, the GM tail assembly. He took a input shaft out of a 241C and then he machined a little he had to widen the bearing basically for his transfer case on that input shaft. At least so he says. So he had to machine that out to fit the bearing. He got the 241C input on his 241 Dodge transfer case, and then bolted it up to his GM back half NV4500. He said it worked great for about 1,200 miles, and then he started having some synchro issues. So,
same thing. He swapped out the front, and he didn't check his end play.
Yeah, well, I'm kind of curious, because I basically told him I would cut him a deal because I want his setup here, and I want to play with it.
Morbid curiosity.
Yeah. I gave him a very good price because I want him to do it. I want him to bring it here without me having to spend any of the money, still get all the information. But I was like, this guy, he did some homework and he tried to make something work. It may or may not have worked. He might have just had another problem, but hats off to him. If you're listening, bud, I'm looking forward to getting your transmission.
No kidding. Yeah, I suppose you could make that work.
So
The
there's
241C has the smaller pilot on it.
If there's questions about the differences, Torque King's website has a plethora of information between even just the pads for the shift forks, the straight white pads that you get in a rebuild kit versus the curved black ones, and or just the note on them, and to take a look and spot those, and
the measurements for the bell housing bolts and all that. That's all available on their website. Yeah.
Let's see. So
all of that's hard won in blood. Every bit of that. Every bit of it, because every time that somebody had a question and we figured out an answer, that goes into the bank. That's more information to put on the website. I've only been with Torque King for just a little over a year here, and I've had the opportunity to add some of my knowledge as I've learned some of these things right straight onto the pages. And that's been one of the greatest things about being here, honestly. I get to be a part of the solution instead of just another cog in the wheel.
Yeah.
But every time I've done that, I look at what Dan's written in there, and he's got, 4 lifetimes worth of information that he's written in on the website. So every bit of that is from experience or encountering that problem in some fashion.
Mm-hmm. So I think that's a good point to jump to the question NP205 to NV4500.
Have either of you guys had a chance to do that yet?
Nope.
Not done that. I know it's
yet.
Yeah, primarily all of our customers are 2nd and 3rd gen guys, and nobody's really rocking a 205. We got done some get drags, for guys that are running the 205 for the passenger side drop. I want to stick a 205 behind one for another project, so shouldn't be too hard.
They bolt right up.
Yeah.
With
that's
the right
long and
input
short of it.
shaft. Yeah, you get the 89 to 93 205. It's interchangeable.
Yeah, with the round 6-bolt mounting. I didn't think it was going to be terribly difficult, but
yeah,
205s are big. I have a 203. I'm going to set up a doubler setup when it gets to that. That'll be pretty sweet. And
the problems you run into with 205 conversions is a lot of people use older 205s or gas, a little bit newer model gas 205s that have the smaller input bearing. So you have to bore the case out to accept the larger input bearing for the larger input shaft.
Mm-hmm.
There is a conversion coupler to go to the 23 spline Dodge which uses the smaller bearing. So that's a quicker way out, I guess, than boring the case. Of course, getting those 27 spline input shafts are a whole other ball game, I guess. But
Yeah, no kidding. On top of the fact that it's just hard to find a good 205, particularly for what you're doing, finding the round input flange for that 205, that's probably the hardest part, because it seems like most of those that were out there are either still in use or somebody's hoarding them somewhere.
Yeah.
And we do have a kit here that does that with aluminum adapters, and it'll do the job. You can still bolt a 205 right up to a 4500. That one isn't exactly 100% bolt on. You've got to modify the output housing on the 4500 a little bit for it to bolt up to the 205 for the Dodge. The Chevy, I think, I don't know. I haven't looked at that real close yet.
I haven't either.
But I do know that the 32 spline input that Chevy was using in the later square bodies where they finished off with about 93, I think, is the very last year.
91, 88 to 91, the
91.
V body.
So there's some of those 205s will have a 32 spline input and the large bearing, much like the Dodge uses the large bearing. And so if you can get a hold of one of those that came behind a Turbo 400 or a SM465 with 32 spline input, or the transfer case, 32 spline output on the transmission, obviously. But those are going to be the easiest one to bolt up. And like Jesse mentioned, if you've got one of the earlier ones with the smaller bearing at the input, then you've got to bore the case. And like Andrew said, find a machine shop, good luck, see if you can get it done. It shouldn't be the hardest operation, but you got to make sure that whoever's doing that kind of work understands just exactly what it takes to be perfectly concentric with that front end, or you end up with alignment problems all the way through the case, and you may as well throw it away as soon as you start. However, 205 is still a good transfer case. There's still lots of parts that are available for them. We have lots of parts for them. We've got brand new gasket kits that are the right thickness of gasket, which anybody out there that has got some of them super paper thin gaskets that they wish they had an actual gasket to put in there for, we've got the right stuff for that too. So the 205 is going to live on for a while yet, and we've got more than just the parts that we already offer. We're always looking for a few more parts, a few more new production parts. For a while, we're having quite an issue finding the output shaft, and we found some more of those, and we have another line on potentially making some more of those. So the 205 transfer case on the back of a 4500, especially if you want to run that right-hand drop front differential, the old Kingpin 60s and 44s, it's absolutely a possible thing. It's not going to be cheap. And basically, if somebody's doing that, it's usually somebody that's rock crawling, something like that. That's what I've experienced so far. And so if you're spending that kind of money on a rock crawler, it can be done.
A lot of them are just guys that don't like chains.
There's that
Don't
too.
like chains in their transfer cases.
Yeah.
There's that too. That takes us right into the doublers, I think, pretty easy.
Yeah.
Unless you had something else there, Wyatt.
No, that's kind of right where I was going with that. So
Okay. So Andrew, you got a guy that's wants to do it, or you're going to do a 203 doubler in front of a 205?
That's all me.
Oh, you. All right.
Yeah. I've been like kind of keeping my eye out for some 203. 203 seem to be like gone by the wayside. I recently took a trip down to California to make some deliveries and pick some stuff up, and there was one that I found on Marketplace in the area that I was in. There's nothing up here that I've seen recently that was in drive distance. I don't know why, man. There's plenty of 205s on Marketplace up here and the surrounding areas. I cannot find 203 stuff. Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned, the 203 was made so that we could have doublers later on.
Everybody says that. Hey,
Well, I had a 203 and a 78 Jimmy with a 350, and that full-time transfer case, I think it weighs 1 million. I'm not sure what the actual unit is, but there's 1 million of them. That's the heaviest dang thing.
Yes.
Oh, they're
I've had to
awful.
bench press one of those up by myself and get it into place. It is 1,000,000 pounds.
You are the Hulk. Holy smokes. I swapped one into that Jimmy when I got it. I think it was 1997 when I got that. It's been a minute since I had it. So when I put that in there, I asked my dad to come help me out, and he said, "Don't ask me to come help you anymore." That was the last thing he ever helped me lift. That was it. That thing was absurd. But anyway, the 203 doubler into the 205, I think it's a great idea. It is fairly compact to have just the reduction unit right at the front. And I know there's more than one outfit out there that has a kit to adapt it to the front of the 205. What are you looking at using?
I forgot the name of the company, the Dodge. Was it? It's not Dodge. It's I don't know. I'd have to look at it again, but it was fairly. There's a company that makes the black box. It was fairly affordable.
Oh, right.
I mean,
I think I have seen that one.
Yeah, that one. That was what I was looking at using. I didn't shop around too hard for it, just because I already have the two. It's like a project that I'm kind of collecting parts for here and there that I'll get to eventually.
Right. Long term.
I did.
So
I did
are you looking
recently
for a
start-
Chevy 203 or a Dodge 203, or what are you looking for the front end of that?
Well, I think the 203 doesn't matter, right? It's the 205. I need a driver's side 203 for my Dodge axle.
Okay.
At least that's the plan.
Well, you still got to go input into the 203 and then from the 203 to the 205, right?
Yeah. So for the 203, I haven't quite decided what I want to do for transfer case, but I bought some 465s for like dirt cheap right down the road here, but I also have obviously 4500 stuff everywhere. So I don't know. I have to play with that a little bit still. If people stop ordering transmissions, maybe I'd have a minute to do that.
Don't pick on me.
Yeah, don't do that.
Don't stop ordering.
Don't pick on me for hoarding transmissions.
No, it's I don't have a ton of experience with them, to be honest. The low on the 241s and 271, 273 is quite a bit steeper. With the right axle gearing, I've never really had like a need. I've never had a dedicated wheeler. I've never been like super duper into wheeling. So the 272 low on these 241s and with a correctly paired axle ratio and tire size, it's generally got me through everything that I've needed to do. But when you start getting serious about it, yeah, either a doubler or dropping your gear ratio, stuff like that is very important. Which I think that might be on the list, right? I think I added something about pairing ring and pinion and tire size and your gear ratios for an effective use of a 4500.
Well, I think we chatted about that on the last one, but I mean, it goes regardless. Well, we want to jump to, there's a general question, just transfer case options.
Yeah.
How much money do you want to
Sky's
spend?
kind of the limit on that.
Yeah.
241s, 271s, 273s. Obviously 205. If you can find the right coupler and make the right adapter, you can put just about whatever you want behind it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess we could get into like for somebody who's just like, I guess I'll answer this question. The basis that I always get it is I'll answer it from the perspective of somebody either wanting to convert to an NV4500 or is building something from scratch that just needs to know what to run. If you're converting to a 4500 and you already have a 241, your existing 241 will work just fine with an input swap. It's 241's a great case. There's a couple different types of 241 to get. There's the DLD and the DHD. DHD's got a little bit wider chain. It's a bit stronger. The early DHDs have a smaller output shaft diameter. The newer
about an inch and
DHDs,
3/8.
yeah, the newer DHDs from 97 to 2002 have a much larger diameter. The problem is from 98 and up, they use the speed sensor in the rear axle, and it's capped on the 98 to 2002 DHD. But
I was just
there's a unicorn.
just got into that. If I can interrupt for just a second,
Yeah.
Andrew. I was just doing an issue with that today. Guys working on another Dodge, and he's got a 96 DHD, and I ended up getting him an early 97 or 6 main shaft to replace his, because that does still use the mechanical driven speedometer, and it converts it right at the transfer case, as I'm sure you know. But if you need that speedo, the later shaft, the 98 to 2002 shaft, it's not everybody's idea, but you can put the 2 extra ring lands that you need on there, and you can actually put a mechanical speedometer on there if you can find a way to get it into the back of your case. But that is an inch and 5/8 shaft instead of the inch and 3/8 shaft from the earlier one. So it is definitely a stronger shaft with a better way to go.
So we just did that with Wyatt's truck. I scored a 97 model DHD. The 97 DHD both has the one-piece tail housing and the much bigger shaft, much stronger shaft, but it also does use the mechanical speedometer provision in the transfer case. So if you're looking at, if you're trying to build something or you're swapping or whatever, and you're at a point where you got to plan on what you're using, I would always, if you have a mechanical speedometer or an electronic speedometer and you're looking for a very compact, good transfer case, I like the 241s. The DHDs, there's obviously an option for either speedometer signal. Your 271 and 273 are much wider transfer case, and they have a much bigger shaft inside, but they like to self-destruct at random. So not a huge fan of those. Not to mention it takes 13 million bolts around the perimeter for some reason. I don't know.
The main case for those, the main reason for those cases shattering is usually CV failure, in almost every case.
Which
it
brings up a good point. If someone decides that they want to do the CAD delete on a second gen Dodge, you're going to be driving with force that front drive shaft all the time, versus with the CAD intact, it may spin, but it's not actually being forced to spin. It's just kind of gliding with the system. So
if you're going to do a CAD delete, the only reason you should even consider a CAD delete is you're nonstop running it off road, or you're going to do a free spin kit. If you're going to do a free spin kit, go ahead and get the CAD deletes. Good combination. But if I agree, Wyatt. If you're gonna put a CAD delete in there, you're running that axle 100% of the time. You're gonna stretch your chain more. You're gonna wear your front drive shaft out sooner, and that is, like Jesse said, we see it here over and over every single day. I get somebody calling about a 271, 273 that they blew up, and it is always because they had a little vibration. Usually, it's in somebody's work truck where the guy that was driving it isn't the guy that owned it. And so they exploded it, left half the transfer case on the side of the road. Don't know where all of it is. And it's always because of that front drive shaft blowing up. The best case scenario we've seen is just blowing up the drive shaft. That's the absolute best version of it.
Which is rare.
It happened one time in my experience so far, one person calling me at just the drive shaft. The worst case scenario, I had a customer buying parts for his. He didn't even have a problem with it yet. He was getting new U-joints for his front drive shaft, and he was going to have it balanced specifically because he went to an auction, saw a really nice looking truck, and he couldn't understand why it was going for so low dollar. He walked over to the truck, and as he got closer to it, he noticed something hanging below. He got over close enough, he could look at it. He could see a little bit of transfer case hanging there. He opened up the door. It had torn through the floor, and there was chunks of whoever owned it previously, or at least whoever was driving, still inside the truck. That was absolutely the worst case scenario. It took out the transmission because it knocked a hole in the transmission from the drive shaft. It hit the engine and pierced the oil pan on that, and the rest that came spinning and tumbling through tore up the floor pretty bad, and definitely hurt the person that was in there. And all because of just low maintenance on a couple of U-joints. It's worth putting some U-joints in. They're pretty cheap.
Third gen problems, yeah, but yeah, it's usually a lot of the issues just come down to neglect or something's out of spec and it's causing wear on something else. And pretty sure Andrew, isn't that how we got that G56 core? That guy lost his front drive line, it punched the front case half, and
Yep.
It's a pretty big ordeal. So the guy went and bought a new transmission, and we got his core off of him. But yeah, it's.
I was going to say that for a G56, like, okay, fine, it sucks. It's expensive. NV4500, it sucks. It's not that expensive, but it can get expensive. Where it's detrimental is if you've got a 5600 and you punch a hole in one of those bell housings. We got spares. I'll probably sell them for, I don't know, $1,700 or so.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah.
And I mean, we got, I think we got 3 spares. That's probably like the most that any one place has.
That's a pretty high number, I'd say.
Yeah, they don't make them anymore. I don't want to get rid of them at all. And if you got to buy one, man, like I bet Super Sticks probably got a couple. We got a couple. I think that's your only 2 choices, and it ain't gonna be cheap.
And it's gonna just get more and more so the same way until somebody decides they're gonna make their own 5600 case, which I doubt is gonna happen. And it really comes right down to just being a numbers game. You look at the Chevy and Dodge 4500 from 92 to 2007. They made a few trucks that they sold with a manual transmission between 92 and 2007. That's a pretty good stretch versus the very, very short stretch of the 5600. And I think I said it in the last podcast too, that the Jeep 56 ran for a bit longer, ran 7 to 18. So it's going to be around, and somebody will come up and make some parts for it, some aftermarket parts that'll take up the gap here and there, and probably more so in the long run than they will for the 5600. But there's no denying that 5600 is a fantastic transmission if you just take care of it. Like anything else, keep it wet, keep it taken care of, and it'll work.
Yeah, you really don't want to poke a hole through the bell housing with that crappy front shaft coming apart.
So that,
aside from the 205s, is there any other transfer case stuff we want to address, we want to get into? I guess basically anything with a 6-bolt mounting flange and some sort of input configuration you can adapt to a 29 spline.
Right. 29 spline for the Dodge or 32 spline for the Chevy, yeah. Either way. And I wanted to point out too, in the process of looking up parts all day, every day, and checking stuff out and see what'll fit what. What I found out is between the 231 new process, new venture transfer case, all the way up to the 271, there are basically 2 planetary sets, 2 6-pinion planetary sets. Some of the smaller 231s will have a 4-pinion planetary set, and I've seen a 5-pinion in 1 or 2 of the smaller versions, the S10 blades or things like that. But if it's behind a V8, there's a wide tooth 6-pinion planetary and a narrow tooth 6-pinion planetary, and TransStar has the same number, and it's an A and a B, and that's it. From 241 to 246s, 243s, 261, 263. It's all the same. It's all the same pitch. It's all the same stuff. So you can take any input shaft that fits any of those NV or NP transfer cases made up to your transmission, and you can make something work there. The difference that you can come into still is the pilot bearing in the back of the input gear. There are a couple of different sizes there. Ford uses a little bit shallower version than the Dodge, and I think the Chevy 241 is smaller than the Dodge 241. But with a little bit of ingenuity, you can make just about anything work behind that NV4500, left or right hand drop.
It's good knowledge. I never really compared a planetary before.
And they're all a 272, every one of them.
Yep.
Every modern transfer case is a 272. I'm not sure about Borg Warner. I haven't got a chance to get into their stuff. They're pretty tight-lipped about keeping all of it. We've got a few parts for Borg Warner transfer cases, but because we just don't have much access to it, I don't have a whole lot of information on it.
Interesting.
I think that kind of settles it for the transfer case stuff. At least we want to jump. There's a question: early to late shift tower conversion. So going from our round to square tops.
Yeah, so just until recently, I've been kind of keeping tabs on it. The round top wasn't available. The square top bare version was available, and just recently, I think just a couple of days ago, we got notifications that people are stocking the loaded tops for both round and square again. So I bought a handful of the bare square tops, and it seems like the only shift fork that's different is reverse. So we're gonna try to convert them over. I haven't done it yet. I'm a little busy. Have you guys attempted to do
What's
that?
different about the shift fork?
There's like a little. Actually, I can grab one here. Hold that thought.
It says right in our manual that we've got that they're all interchangeable.
They
I didn't
are.
think
There
there's
might
any
be
difference.
some aftermarket thing that's different that we're running into now.
Gonna learn. It's always a good day when I'm learning something new. I'd rather be giving people the right information than bad information and regurgitated. I think that should just work.
Still in the package.
Delightful.
So from what I'm seeing, the only difference is this little angle.
I think
Hold it up.
Up a little more. There you go.
There you
There
go.
we go.
A little too high. Or hold it back a little so we can see the whole thing.
What do you like this?
Like towards you.
There, yeah, a little
Bring it
towards
towards
you.
you.
There you go.
Now we're seeing.
Down just a hair.
It must be coming through different on my screen than yours. I'm sorry, I'm new. So I'm thinking
It's coming through widescreen.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So it looks like this angle is the only different. Whereas on this one here, there's no way I'm going to be able to get this across. It's a little bit more squared off. As far as I haven't attempted to do it yet, obviously, but I bought a couple to do that because we couldn't get round tops, and I got a bunch of crappy round tops that don't work anymore. I was going to give it a whirl, and I was scoping out part numbers, and these were the only ones that were different between new and old. And there is a distinct difference between what I'm looking at on this one and this one. This little angle, the other one's a little bit more squared off. So I'm going to give that a whirl. See how that works.
The alignment then on the side where it lines up with the fifth gear little arm inside the inside the transmission, is that same dimensionally front to back there? Yeah, right there.
It looks exactly the same in every way except
for that bit of bracing on the edge there.
yeah. Well, yeah. So there's I don't really know what it's for, but there's like a little on the old one that's squared off, and there's a roll pin up there. I'm assuming for a spring, for actually that extra reverse detent. I'm guessing. That doesn't have it on this new one, obviously. So yeah, that's gonna be here very, very, very soon. Because we got.
So if you were converting covers but keeping your guts, it looks like you may have to do a little modification. But doing just a straight
I think it's just
loaded cover
I think it's-
swap.
Yeah,
should
well, I
be good.
think for swapping a bare cover, so far based on my part number research, it's just that one fork. But then after, once you got that all together, just swapping them right out.
Cover any of them.
What's that?
So complete cover one to another, any of them will swap.
Yes, yeah,
Loaded.
yeah. So if you're taking fully loaded covers, pop one off, put the other one on, no problem.
Yeah.
And I personally like the square top quite a bit better because you just swap your shift tower spacers and boom, it's like fresh. But these
Aside from that,
I have two bad ones where this little round support that fits in there, like
Mhm.
it's wearing down so far. it starts wearing down so far, and then it starts to hang up on the actual shift rails, and it just shifts like feels like crap. I don't like it, so we're gonna fix it and fix the ones we have. I'm gonna try to convert them and just have that knowledge, see if it's capable to be done.
Well, my 97 that I've got it came with a round top, and I swapped in a square top for a little while. That was the one that I did the rebuild on, that I did the teardown on our videos. And so I put that one back in, and personally, I like the square top for having a little more clearance to stick it back in.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, I like those. And then obviously the shifter options, and it's easier to pour oil into. Obviously, it's a much bigger square.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, and they're those tops are available for I don't know if you guys carry them or not. I don't think I saw a Bear one on your website. But the Bear
We've got
square
'em.
tops are only like 140, 150 bucks.
Yeah, we've got them.
Oh, you do? Okay, cool.
Mhm.
Well, that's a good option. Then I will relay back my findings here shortly.
For the next podcast.
Yeah.
So jumping, I got quite a bit of info, just general info. Jump into the cryo treatment. A couple questions on that. So I got a few things. One of which there's a really good publication that was done by the American Society of Metals. You can look it up through a Google search. The title is Cold and Cryogenic Treatment of Steel. And it goes through a lot of pretty advanced material properties and that sort of stuff. So kind of giving a higher level view of it. So the cryo treatment process is another way of hardening and tempering steels, much like a hot heat treatment process. The benefits of it is obviously it can be done after the fact. It doesn't change any dimensional characteristics of said part. And it also is actually easier in general to be done versus a hot heat treatment of steel. It's in that sense, it's much more finicky as far as making sure the part temperatures are in the right places. There's been obviously a lot of advancements since this has kind of started. As far as heat treatments go, it's a relatively newer process. Through their article, they're talking started roughly in the late 30s. The idea is, though, I know we talked about it earlier, to increase the fatigue life of your material. So in a transmission, obviously the teeth themselves, the shafts, you do it to the bearings as well. And then it also helps to reduce the abrasive wear. So it also does have a surface property as well on that. They talk about it. It gets used pretty regularly in machining, like end mills. Some studies from the 70s within this, they talk about high-speed steel and carbide steel end mills. They saw roughly a three times the life expectancy as the cryo-treated options. I guess in layman's terms, what you're trying to do, there's kind of the thought of and I think a lot of it comes into the thought of movies. You see something frozen, you watch Terminator and you whack it, it shatters into a million pieces. It doesn't cause the material to be more brittle if the process is done correctly. So the heat treatment, this is getting a little sciencey, but just for the more you know, the heat treatment process, you're trying to get martensite steel structure, crystal structure versus austenite. Martensite itself is much harder than austenite, so that's the actual hardening process. However, martensite's brittle on its own, so it has to be tempered, which that's the part of it where you're either, if you're doing a hot treatment, it's bringing the temperature slowly down. Like you wouldn't want to quench it. That'll make it brittle. Like that's why they say, if you know anything about welding, like you don't want to quench your weld, you'll make it brittle. And let it slowly come down in temperature. Same kind of thing goes for the cryo treatment. You bring it down to a certain temperature, and then there's a tempering process after that. So it not only will make the material harder, but it then gives it a better chance at, I guess, getting that tempering property over a high temp heat treatment, because the tempering process is much more particular in a high temp heat treatment. And basically, well, most of all of the available gears now that are aftermarket sourced are coming from overseas. Some are better than others. You know, they're cast gears, so there's some level of casting imperfections, and I think in general overseas stuff has gotten better in past work experiences. You know, we sent certain things to be machined out of China at that company I'd worked for. It's not quite what you think of, you know, a bunch of children working old Bridgeport mills or some off brand. It's like nice rows of Haas CNC equipment. Like they're getting better as far as that goes. So I think the casting processes are better. Having said that, the limitations and challenges of the high temp heat treatments are still there. You have to be way more careful than with the cryo treatment, and you kind of got to wonder what you know, something that's a mass produced fifth gear, you know, what's their acceptable failure rate, or what is their acceptable hardness they're trying to get to. I'm not really sure what their you know, QA QC criteria is on their gears, obviously dimensionally, but how are they making sure that they're getting the right heat treatment? And that's kind of where it's nice to do the cryo treatment after the fact, is instead of heat treating 1,000 gears at a time in an industrial situation, you know, we're working with a company, and there's quite a few companies nationwide to cryo treat, and it's doing it under much closer supervision and smaller batches, so you're able to make sure things are done precisely. But for me, I definitely believe cryo treatment is a good option to increase the resistance of the entire system to breakage or to meeting that fatigue limit. The company we also work with can do micro polishing of the gears. Obviously, you can get that surface smoother. There's less imperfections on the surface. There's a lower chance for a crack to start, and then once it starts, it's going to propagate from there to another imperfection. So the surface treatments is another good add-on there. So
for a demonstration, I proposed to Joel a little bit ago that we should just do 2 cryo treated things and then let Chris play with both of them and see which one lasts longer.
One
Fair
that is
enough.
and one that isn't.
Yeah.
I've already got a control. I brought in my input shaft that got wiped off that I talked about last time.
Oh, you
It's
got
here.
it? Let's see it.
Yeah, I'll go get it.
Yeah. The I think I have some 3500 inputs that have been wiped like that, but no 4500 completely smoothed over ones.
We've
But,
got
you know,
a
I mean,
power shaft here. I can get that on the table.
All right, everybody's gone but us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hold down the fort.
Do you guys?
And I think we showed this on the last podcast too.
Do you guys have access to a dyno out and around you, or do you guys network with anybody that has a dyno?
Is there anybody in town that has a dyno that's not a wheel dyno?
Yeah, like a chassis dyno.
I don't think there's anything like that around here. Yeah.
I don't think there's one here either, but I was what we should do is, we should just use our guy and build a full cryo micro polished everything inside, and then have just a regular NV4500, and we should find somebody with enough power to break them, and do a little test back to back.
That'd be an interesting project. Probably an expensive project, but it would be interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we were just gonna ask TorqueKing 4x4 to donate all the parts.
Yeah. Here, I'll donate this.
Yeah. Oh, cool. Those are actually kind of expensive. Yeah. It would be interesting to put, an NV4500 behind a pretty stout truck and give it some real abuse, and then yank it out, inspect it, and put a cryo treated version inside back to back.
I think that goes, I'm assuming that's all coming from, someone with a Dodge diesel or another common rail diesel application that they're trying to run a 4500 behind. I don't know necessarily that cryo treatment is going to gain you much if you're, behind a, Chevy small block or something. Even if it's pretty built, you're not going to send the amount of torque and shock load to that system like the Dodges will, with those Cummins in them. So I think
We'll still
I'm
get
assuming
the better wearability out of them with cryo.
yeah, you'll get the better wearability, and it kind of gets back to like what's your budget, what's your goal. If you're trying to build, a truck that's not going to get driven a ton, and just kind of be a show vehicle, then yeah, it's probably not as necessary. If you're hauling heavy all the time and you use it in a business sense, you might want to really think about it. But it's not too crazy added cost, but it is something that it definitely will make an improvement. And then the micro polishing aspect of it as well, the smoother those surfaces are, you're going to have less friction build up as well between the teeth of the gears. So therefore less friction is going to be less heat, and less heat is, less breakdown of the oil or other potential issues that could happen from too much thermal expansion of, your shafts in respect to your case, what have you. I'm not a material science engineer, so I'm only taking some classes in college for that, but I get the gist of their stuff.
Chris is coming back with his input shaft, I think. Right now, I'll just say we'll do live Q&A after we get through the pre-submitted questions. So any of our viewers that have questions, go ahead and submit those and we'll get to them. Yes.
So,
It's quite
there
a
you
shaft you
go.
got there, Chris.
yeah, isn't that fantastic?
Oh, yeah, there you go.
Oh yeah, nice and flaky. You can see all the gear teeth there. They're still there.
He wasn't doing much.
No, most of the gear teeth were powdered in the oil.
Yeah, it's not gonna get you very
You could
far.
shave with these.
You actually will hurt yourself very badly. Don't do that.
Set that down.
Yeah,
Right.
well, I only bring that up to point out that, I clearly went way too long on, I ought to fix this. And when I say don't go that long, do what I say, not what I do. Don't do that. That's hard. It didn't just take that out. It took that out. Took out the cross counter shaft. That's what I was trying to spit out. Counter shaft. Yeah, you can see. You put the two of them together. That's what was happening. It was just spinning right on by. It was my son Nathan driving it when it finally gave out. He had told me that it had popped out of fifth gear and it wouldn't work. And then he said a couple of days later, yeah, it's popping out of gear and I couldn't shift anywhere. I said, nothing? He says, yeah. And then it was fine. I don't know how it was fine ever. I don't know how that's an intermittent failure in any sense of the word.
Just the heat must have been tacking the metal back together or something
I
to
don't
go.
know. It had
I
to be
don't
just
know.
straight friction driving. It had to be kind of like a CVT. I think that's probably what it was like until it finally gave way. But man, when it gave way, and all he had was fourth gear, and that was it.
Mm-hmm.
because at least we still had those teeth in there. But the thing is, you got to look at it. People think that that's just great big gear that's driving everything. It's that right there. That's why that end play is so important. It's just that little bit of those teeth right there that drives the main shaft in that fourth gear clutch. And you got to have it lined up, and you got to be within that 2 to 4,000, 2 to 6,000s, or it's not gonna last. It's gonna end up like mine did.
Yep.
'Cause that's exactly what it was.
So I think that's it with the questions, unless Joel wants to weigh in on this last one here. I don't.
I think I see the one you're looking at here. Is it the length or girth question?
Yeah.
I don't feel I'm qualified to answer that.
What is it? I'm not looking at the list. What is it? What's the question?
It's just
Length or
length or girth. I guess if we're talking the input shafts, the lengths don't change. If we're talking 1 1/4 to 1 3/8 Dodge, you just get a little more girth with it. So
Yeah. On the other hand, on the output shaft, on the main shaft, there is some different lengths and girths with different spline diameters. GM had 3 different lengths
For the output.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, there is 3 different lengths because there's the 4-wheel drive, which all the 4-wheel drives are the same length for the GM and for the Dodge, same length. For the GM, there are 2 separate 2-wheel drive versions. Both of them are a bolt-on yoke. GM did not offer a slip yoke on a 4500 as far as I've seen so far. Somebody will probably prove me wrong, and it'll be that one-off. Dodge did have a slip yoke 2-wheel drive, and I think it is the longest of the 2-wheel drives is the Dodge version.
It is, yeah.
Dodge also has, and the output for the 2-wheel drive Dodge is a large output, same as the Chevy, if I'm not mistaken, 32 spline. It's a larger diameter. It is a pretty big shaft. So there's plenty of girth there, but not as much capability with only 2 wheels driving instead of 4. Anyway, there's that. The earliest 4500s came behind gas engines at the same time that the G360 Getrag was out in the first gen Dodges. So you could get a 4500 behind a gas engine in a Dodge for that first gen Dodge, but it was a 23 spline output, smaller shaft, so less girth, and only made to handle the torque of what those gas engines were putting out at the time. There's that difference in girth. As far as the, let's see, I think that's all the options there was for output, isn't there?
Pretty
options,
much,
anyway.
yeah, stock options.
I've got a customer that was, I was helping him out this week, get 23 spline early light duty Dodge case, Dodge NV4500 fit up to his DHD, and I had to get him an input shaft, and he also needed an output shaft. That's why I was dealing with that 4 spline versus 2 spline output shaft for the shaft with the Speedo. But he was sticking it behind a Cummins. It was originally behind a gas engine, but he was putting it behind the Cummins, and he said he wasn't wheeling with it. He was just going to daily drive it for driving around, and he'll probably be just fine with that. The 23 spline worked fine with the light duties. I mean, we never, I think in a whole year plus, about 15 months now, I've had one person need a light duty output shaft. Those the gas engines and the same with the Chevys. I sell way more Dodges than Chevys. Chevy just didn't make enough torque out of any motor to tear that transmission up.
Yeah.
But they did have some pretty girthy 2-wheel drive shafts.
My only input on length or girth is, the only thing I'll say is that 2 inches at 200 miles an hour still hurts.
No doubt about that.
I'll take your word for
And
it.
next question, please.
I think that's about all of them. We've got, unless you guys had any more. Oh, we got any other ones besides the live chat?
There was
I think
one
that's-
the guy swapped a shaft in an NV4500 and had no end play. What was the next step?
Oh,
Oh,
Good question.
So
I did run into that once. It looks like you've got a good answer. I'll tell you what I found and recommend it to the guy. As far as no end play on a main shaft, I walked through every bit of it to make sure that he was good from front to back, that he didn't have something that he missed or that he added a wrong spacer in the wrong place like that. Because that can happen. The thrust washer in the front and the back, if you swap them, you can't swap them. They don't work that way. Or if you're using an extra one of your old ones in place instead of the new one in our kit or whatever kit you end up with, you should get our kit. It's the right one. Anyway, you can have some tolerance problems there. You could run into that tolerance lasagna once again. But when we exhausted all the possibilities from the input shaft all the way back to the bearing retainer at the rear, what he ended up doing was taking the bearing retainer at the rear to a machine shop, and he machined about 4 thousandths just in the space where it had to cover the bearing race, just so that it could have a little bit of play there. And once he got it that far, he ended up having to put a few thousandths back in. But that was the answer for that particular case. I suppose you could also put equal shims around the 4 bolts that hold it in place and just push it up against that the bearing race. That would work just the same. Still going to hold it in place, but you have to make sure that it's equal all the way around, because you got to have equal tension all the way across that, or you'll start to jar it and twist it even slightly, and it'll wear faster.
Yeah. Did it say on that question? Did it say if it was counter shaft or main?
He said counter, which makes me think
Was that main shaft or counter shaft?
Counter.
Oh, it's counter shaft. Okay,
Yeah.
well, that's how you address a main shaft.
I
So
would
counter
probably-
shaft, we have seen 1 or 2 where the rear counter shaft bearing, the machine surface wasn't where the bearing stops wasn't deep enough.
Mhm.
So when you put the bearing race on it, was a little high, and that's just machining defects. You know, I've only seen it. I've seen it in person once, and I think I've heard about it from a guy another time, and we, swapped the shaft out. But that's what I've seen so far from counter shaft with no end play.
So I do have some input on it. I've a couple that we've gotten that we've taken apart, I've noticed, and it's pretty much only the ones that have like a ton of end play, like to where the shaft is slamming back and forth. I'm assuming that's how this happened. But the actual bearing retainer, if you put it on something flat and flip it, whatever, if you have a straight edge, they'll have just the
Guys,
slightest
also in
of
the chat.
bows to them. So if you have, for some reason,
It's in the YouTube chat.
Oh.
He mentioned that it was the counter shaft.
yeah.
Oh.
So sometimes those
He is,
bearings,
okay, I'm looking through, I'm just trying to figure out this YouTube comment section here.
Yeah, he's talking. It's the guy with the counter shaft issue. So yeah, if that front race, make sure that that's driven all the way in, number one, and that there was nothing behind it when that race was put in. Is this? I guess the question also comes in: is this a new shaft, or is this just a reassembly, and then you're running into this issue?
Yeah.
Would just make me think the front tapered bearing isn't pressed all the way onto the counter shaft, or that it's the race isn't all the way into the case, or like what Andrew said, if the that rear bearing that retainer plate is bowed. Yeah,
it's super slight, but it has, like I have there over there, they can get kind of beat up and bent outward. So if you did that and you had it flipped around, maybe that might, be taking up the slightest bit that you had, a combination of all three. By the way, you should pull it back out, make sure that's right. You don't want to go in out.
yeah. It looks like there's a slight delay with what we're saying to like what's showing up on the YouTube stuff, but
Yeah, it's about, 30 seconds.
Something like
Another
that.
thing to look at is to make sure that the bearing is pressed on. I don't know if I can hold this up in the camera right. So you can't use just a flat plate to press this bearing on. The shaft does stick through the bearing a little bit.
Yeah, you can see it sticks out just slightly there versus right there at the edge.
yeah, it's not a flush fit.
Right.
No.
There's a Miller tool that will push that bearing. I mean, obviously you could just use any sort of piece of tubing that fits, but push on the bearing without putting any force on the shaft to push that all the way down. That's probably a big part of what he's seeing.
Yeah, well, that is exactly the problem I had when I first put one together. I had no play in it, and I pulled it out and see what was going on, and that was just it. I just didn't have the front bearing on the countershaft pressed all the way down. And it's kind of hard to see because it's under that bevel of that primary gear on the front of the countershaft, so it's hard to tell.
Yeah.
But I
if you
stuck
need
some
to-
feeler gauges down in there, and I
Yeah,
could feel that I still had some room.
Throw that bearing in an oven. You know, if you don't have like a super great pressing setup or whatever, for a couple minutes at 300 degrees, and it'll slip on a lot easier. So if you're sitting there like smashing, you know, that bearing with a hammer and using a piece of pipe or something like that, I mean, yeah, you'll get it seated probably, yeah, if you're doing it right. But if you heat that up, it should be able to slip on super easy, and then it's a little bit easier to identify if it's all the way down or not. So a little heat doesn't hurt is all I was getting at.
That guy is, so he's on the live chat right now. It's new shaft and bearings. Any way to get the shaft back out of the case without pulling the bearing?
Pulling the
rear
shaft
bearing back off.
Probably
Yeah,
the rear
there's-
bearing to,
Not that I know of.
no, it's pretty tight in there.
I mean, he's talking about getting the shaft out of the case or getting the bearing off the shaft.
Getting the shaft out of the case.
Yeah, you got to pull
So we can
that.
inspect it, most likely.
Yeah, you got to block up that shaft in the case, and then you either use the puller tool or bearing splitter to pull that rear counter shaft bearing off before you can actually get the counter shaft out of the case.
Stand it up on end, and sometimes you can wiggle it out without doing that. You stand it up on the front face.
You've been able to get one out that way?
I've never had to. Maybe I'm not understanding what you're saying.
I didn't have problems
the
getting
one
the
that he
counter
was-
shaft out. Main shaft, I've had problems getting out without taking
Yeah.
the bearing off.
Yeah, so that shouldn't be an issue. I mean,
With the
I've never
race
worked.
out? I'm trying to think of if I
Yeah.
had to do that or not.
yeah.
I think
if
I
you-
just pulled the
if you-
bearing.
If you stand I stand the transmission up on end, and that helps get both the main shaft out way easier. Counter shaft shouldn't be a problem. Yeah, I've never seen an issue where, I mean, at least everyone that I've built, I've never had an NV4500 that had, with zero shimming, no end play. I don't think I've even had one that was close. There's generally quite a bit of movement in there, at least from the ones I've done. Even this aftermarket case, we bought an aftermarket case recently. I haven't tried that one yet, but I'll be able to give you a definitive answer on that one here shortly. Any others?
Yeah. Montana Dirt Roads asks, are these picky about what rip'ems and at when you downshift? Sorry, I'm having a hard time reading with this light. I know some of these heavy duty Bruces don't like higher RPMs downshift, like the ZF5 in my F150. So he's asking, are they picky about what RPMs that you shift at?
If your synchronizer is fighting you, don't fight back. Just
I have to agree with that.
Yeah.
I think I've run mine, I've got I don't know what the red line is on my 97 that I'm running all the time, but It's definitely higher than stock by more than a little. And I don't have problems shifting no matter how high I'm running around trying to impress somebody or scare somebody. But that's because I'm always using the right oil in it too.
Yeah.
Even when I had the transmission that was having problems, I was running the right oil in it and I didn't have a problem shifting.
And if you think about it, in the gas applications, those wind up pretty high in comparison. I don't remember any shifting issues at high RPM in a gas engine either.
Yeah, if your synchronizers are in good shape, it should be doing its job both not just up but also down. And so, if unless you're trying to go from like 5th to 2nd or whatever, I don't recommend. But
there is the very early Chevys had the flyweights in the first and second shift hub,
shift inhibitors.
and that would prevent you from going into first or second gear at higher RPM. But
Yeah.
that's the only thing that I can think would prevent you from going down. But you're right. If it's fighting you, don't fight it.
Yeah, the synchronizer will work in the other direction as well. So don't if it's hard to go into gear and it's an otherwise good driving, if it's a good running and driving transmission and you're shifting third, fourth, whatever, and then you're trying to downshift and it's hard, there's a reason it's not matched up yet. So don't try to force it into that. You got to slow down a little bit farther or slow down your RPMs a little bit to make that happen. There's nothing unique about this transmission that makes it inherently difficult to downshift at RPM.
I think that's probably what I like most about a manual transmission. Is a manual transmission is just flat out going to tell you the truth all the time. It works or it doesn't. There's not a whole lot of intermittent anything in a manual transmission. You don't have passages like in a valve body that can stick and not stick or have some kind of buildup in them. I mean, you can get a little bit of buildup in the oil holes in the gears that can take out a bearing, but that is a slow demise and then it's done. And it's still telling you the same truth every time. Yes, it's working, or no, it's not. It's pretty binary, pretty simple. And as long as you keep it nice, it just keeps working.
Yeah, that's kind of like
even this one here. Even with all of that going on, that worked great up until that day, with only the couple of instances where my son said it was not working quite right. Up until right there, it was taking a hell of a lot of abuse. It had a whole lot of carnage inside there clearly before that finally finished off, and it still just worked.
Yeah, it's kind of like that automatic versus manual, argument that the autos, yes, are good, obviously, for a variety of things. But as far as constant abuse, it's going to be a very expensive automatic to handle a lot of what these manual transmissions can take. And I think there's some level of sticker shock sometimes when the manuals need rebuilt, because a lot of the time it's not just like something small that went wrong with it. It's like, something came completely apart and then went through, 3 or 4 gears. You need a new shaft. You might need all new shafts with it. Usually when they do fail, it's more spectacular than an automatic that, has a valve body issue or what have you, and just isn't wanting to go into reverse or whatever, in that sense. What else?
Montana Dirt Roads also posted a comment earlier in the video when we were talking about the 272 reduction and most of the new process stuff. The Borg Warner in his F150 is a 269 to 1, if he remembers correctly. Actually, we had that on the bench last Thursday, and he looked it up then. We were just doing a reseal. But it's very similar to the new process. So, most of those planetary cases, unless you get the Jeep 4 to 1, they're going to be in the 260, 270 reduction range. So there was just that comment.
And I think that's why guys are, still looking at doing that 203 doubler into the 205, because it's just 2 to 1 in those older ones, right? 2 to 1 instead of 2.7 to 1.
1.96.
Something like that.
Mhm.
It's 1.96 for the 205, and the
Right.
203 is the same. So put them together, you get 4-to-1, and it's freaking awesome.
Pulling stumps, that's for sure. Is that the only live questions we're getting?
So far, yeah. Alex, the guy with the counter shaft, zero end play questions, he appreciates us being live right now because he's at the workbench. So it sounds like he's getting to the root of his problems as we speak.
Nice. Well, the let's see. Do we want to talk about like the actual process of setting in play then? I mean, the only reason I say this is because I talked to that guy 2 days ago with the crazy Chevy setup, and I was like, "Well, did you set your end play?" He's like, "I'm not sure," and I'm like, "Well,
So no.
yeah, but
Short
I mean,
answer, no.
being respectful, I was like, okay, well, you didn't because it's a very deliberate process, right? I mean, so
Yeah, and I'm not trying to pick on him either. I'm not trying to pick on him at all.
Not at all, because like I said, I gave him 2 thumbs up. His ingenious attempt was, I mean, I thought it was pretty cool that he tried to make that work, and it seemed to have some success. This is in no way, shape, or form dogging, but when I asked the question, because he swapped the input, when I asked the question, he wasn't aware, and I think the reason I brought that up is because the guy that obviously has some mechanical know-how, excuse me, and some ingenuity, still wasn't quite sure about what that meant. So if it's all right with you guys, maybe we could talk about that whole process, and actually what end play is specifically.
We could leave that for last topic, I guess, unless we get another live question. We're already a little past the 2-hour mark, so yeah, we can cover that and kind of go from there.
Okay. Well, if we got no other questions, and so I guess since we're setting up like a big metal box, right, with spinny stuff in it, and it's very rigid. Having a shaft that's spinning on a bearing that's being really tightly squeezed in, and at RPM and speed and everything like that, it's gonna cause problems, and you're gonna have failures, right? So engineers and crazy, super knowledgeable scientists like Wyatt over there, they designed these gearboxes to have just a little bit of movement, right? Like a little bit of gap, a little bit of space for that shaft to just move back and forth slightly in this box, right? That's what end play is. The end play is just the amount of movement that shaft has, the clearance between both the bearings, right? And it has to be a very small amount, right? It can't be a ton, because then, like I was talking about earlier, the shafts will start to splay and your contact pattern will be all screwed up. But it's an absolutely critical measurement for the longevity and lifespan of your transmission, right? So when you assemble like just dropping your counter shaft in, right? Like we were just talking about, you drop your counter shaft in, you put your bearings in, your races, you put your bearing retainer on there. And what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to stand your transmission up on end, with the output side up. You're going to set up a dial indicator on the end with the needle on the end of the shaft, and you're just going to use a little pry bar or a bar or something to move that shaft up and down. And you're going to use the dial indicator to measure exactly how much that shaft can move. Now, your first measurement is probably going to be something pretty large, something like 30, 40, 50 thousandths. That's way too much. And so to set your end plate to the right spec, you'll take your bearing retainer off. You'll get a set of shims that are included in most kits. Set it on the end of the at the end of the bearing race. Put the bearing retainer back on, and that'll squeeze the races closer together, and that'll shorten the amount of movement that your shaft has. Loctite your bolts and stuff when you got it set, so that way they don't back out and your end plate loosens up. But you want to make sure that it's between that 2 and 6 thousandths end play spec. That means your shaft can only move back and forth 2 thousandths to 6 thousandths. It's super small amount. but it's very critical. And then you put your bearing retainer on. Then you got to do that same thing over and over again, or over again with the input and main assembled. And you have to have your input bearing retainer put in place, torqued with your sealant, in order to take an effective measurement of end play on the on your main shafts, because that's all part of the total package, right?
Yeah, make sure when swapping out the shims between the counter shaft and the main shaft and putting those retaining plates back on, that you're not being lazy and just either running them tight with an impact or whatever you're doing. Make sure to torque them every time as if you're doing your final assembly, just so you're getting a consistent reading every time you're doing that. But Andrew does bring up a good point too. Whatever sealant you're using within the input retainer, that is going to add, albeit minor, but some level of additional clearance on the input side. So your input to main shaft end play, if you're taking all your measurements initially without the sealant there, and then putting it in and then sealing it up and just going, you might be fine. But if you're on the low, if you're right at 2,000ths, or you're trying to fudge 1 3/4 thousandths, or rather, I guess we probably more of an issue the other way. Say you're at 6 or what have you, you're going to end up with more. Obviously, with fresh bearings and everything, we always try and set ours to the low end of that spec, because everything's brand new. So get it close to 2 to 3 is usually where we live. And if you end up preloading it, I mean, basically what happens is the shafts grow as they heat up. That 2 to 6 thou end play it's a direct function of the distance between the bearings and then the material, that steel between them. So at X temperatures that are expected of that transmission, that steel grows a certain, couple thousandths of an inch. So if you put preload on it, it has nowhere to expand to. So we've seen people with cases that have cracks around those rear retaining plate bolt holes. And I think that could be, a function of two things: either too much end play, and then when the transmission is shock loaded, it's slamming into those rear plates, or not enough end play and you're flexing that case, but it's very obvious with a transmission that didn't have enough end play or had preload. You open it up, the races and bearings are bronzed if they're not totally destroyed, and kind of falls back into the longevity discussion. Like if it's not set right in either direction, you're going to have a lot of issues.
And
I wanted
thing
to-
I say is that, go ahead, Chris.
I just wanted to mention part of the problem with end play, and I'm getting real close to the mic there, sorry. That bearing, you look at it, that's not a ball bearing, that's a needle bearing, right? And this bearing is made for forces in a rotational manner. That's the only way that bearing is meant to work, is rotational forces. We do not want to have that bearing sliding back and forth. And you have a bearing very similar to that one in the backside of the input shaft. So right in there, you get a bearing like that in there. And you have one place in the whole transmission that has a thrust bearing that's not just a thrust washer. And that's right there between the back end here and the front end of your main shaft, right there at the 3/4 hub. It's the only place where you've got that thrust bearing. Exactly. Thank you. So these bearings are made for the rotational forces. That's what they're supposed to be there for. They're not made for axial forces back and forth. And that's part of the reason that is so important. It's that axial force that's not supposed to be there that starts wearing things out, because you're dragging it sideways instead of rolling it around. That's all I had there.
And I lost Mike. What were we talking about? What were you saying? What? Because brought up a good point and I forgot it. Sorry.
The crack in the cases or the preload or
Yeah, I don't know. I lost it.
jogging your memory.
It'll come back. No, I was listening to Chris. Yeah, no, I was gonna say that when we're setting the end play on these two shafts, we're setting between a set of tapered cup and cone bearings, right? And if you're using brand new bearings, like all new stuff from a good kit, I would highly encourage you to get as close to the 2000s as possible, because if you were to build a brand new transmission with all this nice stuff, set it to 2000 exactly, dead nuts both shafts. When you take it apart after 50,000 miles, you're going to notice that end play's actually grown a little bit. Everything kind of settles and falls in love, I like to say, but your end play will grow a little bit. So the spec is 2 to 6 thousandths. It's going to change. It's going to grow a little bit. We highly encourage people to stay to the low end, or as close to 2 as possible. Because
let me jump in with one thing that reminds me with that too, especially with new bearings or really just having it all pulled apart. And now you'd be very gentle, but take like a dead blow hammer and once everything's assembled how you want it for the counter shaft, tap it. It can, if you're on the tight side and you think you're at like 2000ths, if everything's new and totally together and you haven't kind of like tapped the shafts with the main shaft, tap the end of the input, tap the end of the main shaft gently, and
Gently
it's kind of like make sure everything
tap.
Yeah, a very, very gentle love tap there just to make sure everything's totally seated right. But it can change it. You might think you're right on the money, and then after that tap, which would basically occur as soon as the transmission's put in the vehicle, you recheck your measurement, and instead of you thought you were 2 or 3 thousandths, you're actually at like 8 or 9. So just a word of advice to take that little step, because and like what Chris was saying, so if you're building it on the backside of that input, that needle style thrust washer or a thrust bearing, it looks like a washer, is it's really small. So whenever you're hitting the ends of those shafts, it seriously be very gentle about it, but just tap it just to make sure everything's seated.
Yeah, all joking aside, talking about a love tap and striking it gently, he's absolutely right. That thrust bearing that does the needles in that are slightly conical in the race that they sit on, so that they can travel at least close to the same speed at the inside of the circle as the outside. And so that's very, very small and a very delicate bearing. It does take some thrust loading there, but it's not made for hauling on, smacking the back end of it with a 7-pound sledgehammer.
Get the air hammer.
The air hammer. Go right for it. But yeah, get it. Make sure everything's seated well. And I agree. Yeah, dead blow is probably the best way to go. A good heavy rubber mallet would be your next best bet, but I sure wouldn't want to go hitting it with a hard hammer hard.
Yeah, don't do that. Those shafts are hardened to some extent. You do risk chipping it if you hit it with a actual hardened steel hammer. So someone, it looks like we got one more. I don't know if that's a question or not. Doesn't really look like a question.
Is it more about length or girth?
I guess it's length of longevity. They kept failing after 1,200 miles or less, and this guy's rebuild has 30K on it. No issues, but it is a noisy transmission, and I think that can be kind of relative.
Yeah, I think that's pretty subjective. Some people think they're loud transmissions, some people don't. And maybe one is louder than another, but if all somebody's ever driven is later model automatics and later model manual transmissions, the manual's clearly louder than the automatic. If you're used to driving old 435s and T18s and stuff like that, The first transmission, first thing I ever drove had straight cut gears and no synchros. So that thing would whine like the dickens going down the road. And I think it was top speed of about 48 miles an hour. I can't even remember. It's an old International 1-ton truck with 17-inch dualies on it. The thing went about top speed of maybe 55, maybe. And I think it was wound to the moon doing it. But I don't think they're really that loud of a transmission. It's if you're still having too much noise, you might have holes down in your covers over the top of the transmission on the tunnel there, and it doesn't take very much of a hole in your shifter boot. That's the primary boot right at the steel, right at the base of the floor. If you've got holes there, you can communicate a lot of noise back up in there. I don't know. That's just pretty subjective in my opinion, anyways.
I wonder what, when he said it's failing after 1,200 miles, is he a live listener? Can he elaborate on when he says failures? What does he mean? Is it catastrophic, or just hard shifting, or just loud bearings? What does he mean there?
Yeah, if you could elaborate. There's a little delay on our video feed here.
Yeah, because I mean, when he says failure, I'm inclined to think that, you know, he means something either went kaboom, or, you know, not just it got a little bit noisy. I wouldn't really consider that a failure. But if he's saying like his synchros stopped working after 1,200 miles, I mean, it's very possible he ran the wrong fluid and glazed his synchros over, or you know, used the wrong.
Yeah, we've run into there's an outfit that does straight brass synchros for that. You guys remember? I don't remember, but if they're running straight brass synchros and they're used to putting just whatever gear oil in, and then they get one that's built with the proper synchros and are using the wrong fluid, that could be part of the problem with the failure. I did have one customer that had 3 transmissions fail on him in 3 years. He'd get just about a year out of them and they'd fail. And each time it was the same one being rebuilt. Then I said, well, you know, if you can get into it and check all the specs, make sure that everything's line board right and everything looks good there, you know, build it right, build it with the right parts. Don't take it to the same shop. As much as I hate to cast shade on anybody, if the same shop has failed at a transmission 3 times, how many times do you want to give it to them? But using the proper stuff, using the right stuff. I'm not just preaching because I want to sell parts. I love selling parts. We'll take all your money. Everything you want to send our way, go for it. We're happy to take it. However, that's not why I'm telling you just get the right stuff. Get the right stuff because you don't want to have to do it twice. If you're going to spend the money, spend it one time on that, and then get yourself another pickup, and we can fix that transmission with you too. Be happy to.
Well,
make another one work.
And another thing to add though is that, like, when people think rebuild, I just need a rebuild kit. Sell me a rebuild kit. Well, that's for these manual transmissions. That's going to include a set of tapered bearing races and a set of seals and maybe synchros if you get one with synchros. But there's like a whole lot of extra things you got to throw in there. You need a small parts kit. You need a needle bearing kit. If you're just reusing needle bearings over and over again, I mean, you're half rebuilding your transmission. There's not like a whole lot of needle bearing failures, right? But I mean, if you got 300,000 miles on your transmission, that's 300,000 miles those needle bearings have seen. So you need to swap out everything. You need to get this whole comprehensive parts list to have a actual rebuilt new transmission.
Can you put up the QK1003 kit on the screen?
You know, and I was talking to these guys earlier today, you know, assembling parts kits for other transmissions. It's not just this one thing. You got to buy like a lot more to have
Everything that touches everything.
And if this place has had delivery bathroom.
There you go.
Wyatt's holding a lizard. It's awesome.
So it looks, that is an alligator. Thank you very much.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah. So it looks like our guy Alex here was able to find out. He commented again, that front bearing on the counter shaft wasn't seated all the way, so he's got 12 thousandths end play to work with now, which is
there we go.
Man.
Good deal. We've done good in the world. Good job, fellas.
Fixed one thing. But yeah, so like I was saying, I mean, if his failure includes just noisiness and the shop is just putting tapered bearings and races and seals and just using the same worn grooved washers and the same crappy stuff, right? Those same things that are making lots of noise are what's creeping back up, right? So I mean, make sure you replace all your races, all your needle bearings, all your thrust washers, you know, all those little spacers, all the dumb stuff. Make sure you fix, and the input thrust washer and the input bearing. Some of these kits don't come with the correct fourth gear, you know, the input shaft bearing, you know, for some reason, I don't know why, but for some reason, some of the kits don't come with the right size bearing for the input shaft, the needle bearing. And so guys just reuse the thrust washer and the, right. And if that's the 300,000 mile wash, it's probably where all the noise is coming from. That's pissed off.
So we've got up on the screen here what a comprehensive kit looks like for those that are used to seeing eBay kits and they've got some bearings and maybe some other onesie twosies. But this is it right here.
Yeah.
He's not
See,
going to let you
it's-
stop betting him.
It's a lot more than just bearings and synchros and seals. Right.
Yeah, and this particular kit, this is our main master kit for the Dodge. It's got the full spline shaft for the Dodge, and it's also got every little piece that you're going to need in there. And I'm talking every piece inside of there. Other than actual counter shaft and input shaft, this covers it all. All the bearings, all the wear parts, all the little plastic parts. See, I wish I had a way to point at it, but right above the K there, you see the two little white washers there. Those are those wave washers that you guys know clearly, but for the guys that are watching here, those little wavy washers there are just end thrust washers for the reverse idler. That's that reverse idler. This is the early reverse idler, the large dual plane one. But those thrust washers go on either side of it, one on either side. And if you've had some wear in the transmission where you've got glitter in the oil and she's looking like a stripper pole there, you got all of that stuff ground into those plastics. It's ground into those plastic wave washers on the side of your reverse idler. It's ground into the shift fork pads that go on the reverse and fifth shift fork at the back. The others are aluminum, so they don't have that trouble. But everywhere that plastic is and the oil touches gets some of that glitter ground into it, and you want to replace those. And this kit has all of those pieces, everything you need. Yeah, you can get some of that into the plastic race cages as well in the needle bearings, and that's just going to be more grit grinding up the transmission. So if you price out each individual piece, and we can sell it that way, we can sell every single part of it. Happy to sell every part. Like I said, we'll take all your money. But if you price out each individual piece and you think, is the whole transmission worth that $16 bearing or that $20 bearing or that $4 part? It's absolutely worth getting every one of the pieces.
Absolutely. So we've got a couple more. So the Alex guy came back, asked if anyone's seen a cracked 3/4 inner hub. I also want to make a note on that. That is directional. The oil groove faces forward on the transmission. So maybe take a note if it was put in backwards, if it was a previously done rebuild. Kind of curious as to how it was cracked, but another comment on countershaft fifth synchro gear fits. Read on the Torque King website, it's a loose fit. Was on my rebuild. It is a looser fit. It has to be to have clearance for that synchronizer to actually move around in there. That's, I'm assuming, what the question is.
Maybe
It is a little bit of a loose fit, but originally there was just one snap ring on that countershaft fifth gear where it holds the fifth gear clutch and the synchro right there at the back of the countershaft. And that single snap ring is one thing that we cannot get anymore. They stopped making that. So instead we use 2 snap rings that take up the difference and give you the proper clearance in there. But we've got that in that kit as well.
I'm still
Yeah.
kind of stuck on how he cracked his direct hub. I want to picture that.
Comment a little further up from him. He's the guy with the counter shaft bearing not seated, used wrong tool first time. Is that? Alex?
No, that's not our Alex.
That's not our, okay. Used wrong tool first time. We now have 12,000 send play. And he's the one that commented. He asked if we've ever seen a crack through 3/4 hub. So he pulled one out.
The damage that we see on hubs typically is like from grooving or something grinding in or stuff like that. I don't think I've ever seen a direct hub like crack. Like it got just too many beans and cracked itself.
Doing a sled pull in third.
I feel like the slider would probably give up before then. Right?
I think.
But
Yeah.
still cool.
Yeah, I want to see it too.
Comment asking about that oil groove, Alex again. You should be able to see it. It's going to be just.
I'll grab one.
Oh, you
Yeah.
got one? I got one too.
It's just to the outside edge of where that thrust bearing sits.
Andrew's going to get it quicker than I can go grab one, but I can grab one if he doesn't find it.
His shop's a lot smaller than ours.
Yeah.
It's quicker to find things there.
He doesn't have to duck under lights on the way out the door.
Yeah.
Yeah, getting things in the right direction, in the right order. It's pretty pivotal making that thing work. They didn't just come up with the order of putting things together by accident. It's like they engineered it.
Yeah. So we got another comment here from Dixie May. Wyatt, I think you left him a comment. Where did I lost it? First are married.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, sir. He wants to rebuild a 205. He got dirt cheap. It's a married Ford. I assume it's in related to the rest of your conversation on the chat here.
Can you touch on the married or divorced here in a second? Yeah. Andrews, you got that. Okay, there we go.
So it took me a minute. We bought some parts washers, and I got one cycle out of mine and it failed, and so I'm rewiring it over here. And
What?
They were
You
used.
should have went with was it PwC or whoever or
yeah, it was like
PW,
13 grand, right?
whoever we
did you
had,
look
yeah.
at that? It was-
ours has been going strong since '92 or something.
well,
That
I
dishwasher
found
gets some serious
an
abuse.
American-made one, and I drove all the way to California to get it. So I was hoping to avoid this, and I made it through one
Yeah.
cycle, and it shit out.
PMW, that's our brand. Precision Metalworks, yeah.
Is that coming through the groove?
Hold still a little bit.
Kinda.
Yeah, tilted a little bit.
It's that dark line. If you can see, it's on the outer. Like I said, it's on the outer side. There you go. That's pretty good. Outer
There you
side
go. You're tilted a little more.
thrust bearings at. A little more. There you go.
Ooh.
All right, now turn it over so they see the other side and see exactly what they're looking not for.
Yeah, it's
Okay,
all
so
flat.
right in close to that hub, it's all flat. Yeah.
Talking about this little groove right in here versus this one. Yeah.
Feel like I'm at the eye doctor. 1, 2.
It looks looks completely different on my screen than when I got the gear too close to my phone. The screen went black. It's all right. I feel old today. Yeah. Did that answer his question?
Old, I'm here. Unless you start agreeing with everything I say, you don't get to feel old.
All right then.
I just turned 49.
Yeah, that's pretty.
Nobody's close. You guys are all kids. I'm talking about doing stuff in 97. You're like, was I? No, I wasn't born yet. No, you weren't. No, I don't get that word. Yeah, there you go.
All right. Did that answer his question, Wyatt?
I think so. Should he hadn't replied, he just said he'll send a photo, but hopefully that answered it for him.
Looks like Andrew doesn't get it out. There's back.
I was gonna say, was I frozen? Oh, we're back.
Yeah.
Back to Dixie May had another question. Do we have any late? We have another late model cross member, don't we, for a second gen?
No, we don't.
Didn't get. No, we don't have any right now. Okay.
Only have the early ones.
Yeah, call us and chat more if you want to actually do a 4500 purchase. We probably get you squared away versus through the live chat.
Yeah, call the number on our website. We'd be happy to talk to you.
Yeah. Don't see any other.
You need a whole transmission. Call these guys. Tell them Chris sent you.
Yeah.
I think at the rate we're going lately, we're running out of transmissions to sell.
Well, looking at your Instagram posts and whatever else in the hours that you guys are calling in, I wonder if you're actually sleeping.
Wyatt, yeah, me, no.
Oh,
Occasionally.
that's probably how he maintains the science brain.
Yeah, Mega Mind over
agree.
there needs to sleep, and me not so much. I got a little kid, man, and he doesn't let me sleep.
Yeah, what's sleep?
Yeah.
I got 5 kids, and after 3, it's just loud. That's what I told everybody. You got 5 kids. You know what causes that? Length and girth? No, that's something else. Yeah, I said I know it causes that, but honestly, after 3, it's just loud. And everything after 3 is loud. 3 p.m., 3 a.m. It's all loud. A lot of kids. Anyway, I'm going to get out of here, guys. I think I've answered all that I can answer, and all I'm doing is droning on anyway at this point. So
Yeah.
It's a pleasure seeing you guys. I'll see you another day.
Always a good time. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks for being here.
I'm glad I could.
So, going through these questions.
I do see one more asking about the gear split between 3 and 4 being pretty wide. Yeah, it is pretty wide on especially a stock governed P pump 12 valve. It can kind of suck actually trying to go from 3rd to 4th. I think that's part of why the governor spring upgrade to go to 3,000 or 4,000 RPMs is so prevalent. So you can actually rev it out further before you do your shift there. That was fixed obviously with the 6 speeds, but
Yeah, the 6-speed is the remedy for that. Unfortunately, it's a very expensive remedy.
yeah.
The gear splits on a 6-speed are so much nicer, but granted, it's a whole different animal of a transmission. It's not quite so easy and user friendly, but yeah, get some. It's just an excuse to bring up your RPM range and bring up your power, and 4,500 built right will handle it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's see. Any others we want to talk about or get back to?
Not really. One
Okay.
asking if 3.4 can be fixed. There's currently no aftermarket gears with alternate ratios available. The best help would either be to switch to a 6-speed or get like a gear vendors, and then you could have that planetary overdrive to do 3 overdrive and then shift into 4 standard would be the only option as far as fixing it, I guess, and maintaining 5-speed.
Oh,
Oh yeah, look at that.
he broke off one of the little notches. Yeah. Okay.
That'd be
There had to be some
kinda
gear.
tricky if
some
it
gear-
was.
There had to be a gear tooth failure that jammed in there somewhere.
That or if it was dropped previously, you know, who knows how many people have been into this transmission yet. That would do it.
This podcast just got a whole lot prettier.
Could just be a manufacturing flaw.
You're gonna get yelled at for not having a business shirt on.
Oh yeah, it's on. It's not exposed.
It's all right. He's making this happen.
Yeah, I've been producing this.
Let's give him a hand, everybody.
Woo, Joe! Yeah, no, that hub definitely needs to be replaced because it's where your key is obviously going to be riding, and that needs to be there. So, good thing those are fairly affordable. Yeah. Now we can see his muscles. Look at that. Even better.
So here's another question. I think we covered that. Here's the next question. Thoughts on Zumbrota Trans?
Well, I mean, I
As far as
Yeah.
reasons go, we're gonna say they're absolutely terrible. You should send all of it to us, but they're a big supplier, obviously, so they have a lot of stuff.
they
kinda-
a lot
they're
of
gonna be.
Oh. Go ahead, Wyatt. Sorry.
I was just gonna say they're just doing totally stock for stock builds with whatever they're doing. I don't think they do any sort of performance builds if you're buying something from them. As far as parts, they're a supplier.
Mhm.
So our thoughts on Zumbrota Trans. I believe they have a different parent company now. I don't know if some of the stuff that they used to do is some of the stuff that they still do. And honestly, I haven't really heard anything recent from those guys. You guys are more in the rebuilder industry with rebuilder competitors and stuff. You'd probably know more than me. But somewhat recently, Zumbrota has been bought out by somebody else.
And I think their primary function now is supplying of parts, right? I mean, I know they do build, but I don't.
It is.
It seems to me that there's a whole lot of ZMNK part numbers on stuff, and I think
Yes.
their primary function is going more towards supply and distribution rather than building. And I'm not part of their company. I have no affiliation, so I'm not really qualified to speak on what their operations are, and I'm not attempting to do that. It just from the perception of the industry, it seems like they've shifted more towards supplying. I don't live anywhere near them. I've never been to their shop. I've never even talked to anybody that works there, so I don't know if they are building more than ever. I would have no idea, but I have definitely noticed that they have really upped their game in regards to supplying and distributing parts and components.
They may have upped their game on rebuilding. I believe they are the main supplier now for their parent company.
Yeah,
On manufactured units.
definitely.
I have a question for you guys.
Yeah.
Actually, I was talking to my friends about the cryo treatment, and they were wondering what temperatures do they run cryo treatment at?
So it can vary. Usually it's done with liquid nitrogen. That technical journal article that I was kind of referencing, they mentioned that anything sub about 120 degrees Fahrenheit is kind of the 120 is the threshold that needs to be kept. Anything past that is fine, but they didn't really notice any changes. So it needs to be done, and that's kind of the thing. I wouldn't recommend anyone try to just go out and get liquid nitrogen and try and do their own cryo treatment. Not even the danger aspect of it. It's not that. It's the bringing it back slowly up to temperature to then temper that steel. Otherwise, you will have a very brittle piece afterwards. But yeah, it's anywhere sub 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Like I said, liquid nitrogen, I think is sub 200, something like that.
I think the places that when I was shopping around for trying to find a company to use, pretty much everybody that is cryo treating stuff for this sort of industry or automotively targeted, it seemed like the typical temperature ranges were between minus 300 and minus 350, and they would leave it there for a couple days at that temperature and then slowly let it climb back up.
Wow.
I don't know what their rates or whatever are, but it's if you've some places will show pictures of when they open the freezer, and it's been in there for 3 days and it looks crazy. It looks like something from a some sort of nightmare.
Yeah, so liquid nitrogen's boiling point is negative 320, so it's going to stay somewhere right around that level, which would make sense. 300 to 350 is right about in there. But yeah, it has to be held at that temperature because you're rearranging the crystal structure of the steel in doing that. So
so that
it's going to take a little more than just some trial and error. So yeah, don't
attempt it yourself,
or attempt it yourself and let me know the results. I'd be very curious.
yeah, if you nail it, let us know.
I think you guys should dip a whole transmission in liquid nitrogen for like an hour.
Yeah.
And then
what do you think, Wyatt?
just like throw it outside in the sun and see how long it lasts.
Well, I think all of the shift pads on the forks and the reverse idler thrust washers, anything like that's going to be totally shot. But I mean, you can put it's not just the gears, it's the shafts, the bearings.
Pretty much anything that's metal, right? I mean,
yeah, basically whatever. I wouldn't recommend necessarily putting like your hardware in it, but yeah.
So do you think there would be any benefit to actually cryo treating an entire case?
I don't think so, because when you're cryo treating, it's a per pound cost. Obviously, the case is heavy, and the case failures don't seem to be an issue really at all, unless it's an end play problem or some other issue that's driving it. I don't know, maybe on like a 500,000 mile truck, the case is fatigued enough that's why it cracks. But since the cases are remanufactured, I couldn't see a reason why to do it.
What about aluminum? Does it have the same effect on aluminum?
Don't believe so. I think it's mainly just a steel property. I haven't really dug any sort of aluminum. I mean, there's different, I think it's more in the alloy process of aluminum. Like you've got the 7000 like aircraft. It's like 7075 or something like that. The aircraft grade aluminums that are more of a hardened aluminum, but then they have issues with machining properties and stuff like that afterwards. But yeah. I don't think it's a heat driven hardness. It's whatever the alloys are within the mixture.
Okay. Well.
But I could see where you're going with this, making a G56 cryo treated case.
Just cryo treat the girdle, you'll be fine.
Yeah.
Treat the
girdle. Okay.
We had another question. Cryo gears, ? Necessary for hauling up to 20,000 pounds with a gooseneck 96 12 valve?
So I'm not saying we're missing key information to answer that correctly, but there's a lot of factors that would change that. Your just hauling your transmission in stock form can haul 26K just fine. There's not like a gear failure point just based on the force needed to move that amount. It's both your horsepower that's driven through those gears to move that kind of weight, and your rate of delivery. I like to say. So if you've got 600 horsepower and a dual disc ceramic, and you drive like a jerk, and you're trying to drive like a jerk while pulling 26K, you're gonna see those gear failures. And I don't know necessarily if cryo treatment will be the way to help you.
It would help with fatigue, but I think the stock book on a gooseneck setup for a 95 at least. I think 96 is the same. It's like 17 or 19,000 pounds. So you're slightly over the weight rating. But also, I know we had talked on the last podcast about both your gear ratio, that max hauling is with the 410. So if you're with 350 and with stock tires, so 410s with, I think the stock tire size was 245s or 265, 75 16s. So pretty small. So if you're running the 355 gears at 20,000 pounds, you're already at a pretty big disadvantage. If you're anything over stock tire size, is compounding that issue. And then it kind of gets to the point of how often are you towing 20,000 pounds? Are you flatland tower? Is it, you're taking it 10 miles down the road? Or are you trying to like haul tens of thousands or, tens of, miles like with it? And also, what's your expectation on longevity? Do you want to try to build it to last another 200,000 miles? Is that the expectation for the truck? You trying to build it to maybe do another 50K, but also how much is it driven just otherwise? Does the truck get like 2,000-3,000 miles a year put on it, or does it get 25,000 miles a year put on it? The cryo treatment will help, but there are a lot of other things that would be a much better, I guess, longevity increaser, gearing, tires, stuff of that nature over just cryo treatment.
Yeah, I think the stance that Wyatt and I have kind of taken with all the customers that have inquired about that with their certain situations is that it's very important to try to keep this thing cool, and to keep good oil in it. But there's not like a threshold of work where you're like, that will not work unless it's cryo treated. It will probably last longer cryo treated if you're like pushing it, but your transmission will handle towing 26K, 20,000, 20, whatever in that upper legal limit. The transmission will handle that, as long as it is done smartly, basically like with a smart application. And reducing like what Wyatt's saying with changing your gear ratios and tire sizes, you're reducing the forces seen in that transmission, right? So if you got stock powertrain, or stock-ish level engine horsepower that the transmission's seeing, then you have some sort of optimal towing or close to it towing setup with your rear axle and your tire size. This thing will live just fine as long as you drive it responsibly. Cryo would just help it last longer. And if you're getting to the point in horsepower where you're like, I don't know if I'll make it without cryo, you probably need to look at changing up your setup and maybe consider going to a 6-speed.
You did elaborate a little bit on this one.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
I haul logs for sawmill. 20K is right around what I'm hauling. Sounds like I need to re-gear to 410 or so. I'm running 35, 12, 50, 17. Thanks for the info.
Yeah, you're putting a lot of stress on that transmission. Yeah, I'd say for 35s, you might want to step, take another step past just the 410s, especially if it's what the truck is doing full time.
456, 488,
Yeah.
it's going to be a little better probably.
Yeah. At a bare minimum, you could probably find a stock 410 axle set somewhere, right? At a bare minimum, 354s and 35s, and pushing commercial weight limits is not how you make that's the opposite of what we were just discussing.
The benefit he would get out of that setup is he doesn't have to worry about pulling in fifth.
Yeah, that is true.
I don't know.
Yeah, your fourth, your direct drive is cruising at 70 or whatever.
I know what a lot of people have done over the years. It kind of gets away from the NV4500 portion of this podcast, but going to like an Eaton 6 or 7 or 8 speed. And of course, you can only get those in 2-wheel drive. And then you just put a divorce kit in your transfer case and you divorce your case, and you can still retain 4-wheel drive. This guy, he's probably riding that line, I would say. He definitely has a lot of room to play with his gears, and right now is he only pulling in fourth. For the NV4500, that's a good scenario. All this other stuff kind of detracts from it with a faster gear ratio. If one could come across a few different used axles with different ratios in it, and you had the time, experiment with different ratios. Would probably be my go-to recommendation before recommending what a lot of other people have done and go to an Eaton transmission or something like that.
Yeah, he followed it up with hauling daily driver, hauls logs maybe twice a month. I'd say at a minimum with that setup, do the 410s, still probably knocking on the door of the 456s. But the 410 gears will be an all-around less stress for sure to that 5-speed that I don't personally think the cryo treatment alone can overcome. I mean, like we said, it'll definitely help. It's roughly about 30% stronger, better longevity as far as the fatigue limits of what you're doing. But if you're riding that line of the fatigue limit, then you're shifting it out a little bit. But if the longevity with the setup is 40,000 miles, add 30% onto that, it doesn't even get you another, I don't even think that's another 10,000 miles, but it's not necessarily worth it. You'd be better off doing the 410s or 456s. If you want to do that and then still decide that it's something you really want to make sure you never have to get into again, at that point, then yeah, the cryo treatment, but I wouldn't lead with the cryo treatment transmission before doing your axles.
At the end of the day, cryo treatment will never hurt. Obviously, it'll hurt your wallet, but that's it.
Yeah, and it's not that much more expensive. We offer it with our build packages if you want it. But the micro polishing definitely looks cool. I think there's a lot of other factors that you can address on a work transmission that would be more beneficial. And at a bare minimum, like re-gear, run good oil, put some coolers on there.
Absolutely. Yeah, and the nice thing about the coolers, if you haven't seen them, they can come provisioned with ports for temp sensors. Just because it's a manual doesn't mean it doesn't build heat. It is always good to monitor your transmission temps. So
yeah, quite the opposite. In fact, they build quite a bit of heat.
Yeah,
You'll see some hot temperatures on a 6-speed. You know, and these just big iron cases just hold the heat in. So anything you can do to help that.
Be about ready to call it a wrap. I don't think we have any more questions.
I think that's 2 hours. So
There was one question. Where is it? NV5600 podcast.
I would love that.
oh yeah.
I like the 5
Sounded-
speeds, but 6 speed is where it's at in my book.
I sent an email out a couple days ago and just said, this is kind of what we're doing. Want to hear from you guys. Any questions you have? That's where most of the questions came from. A lot of the talking points came from the emails I got back. But about half of them were like, please continue what you're doing and go into the NV5600.
Sweet.
One guy even specifically mentioned NP435s.
Eventually.
That'd be cool.
Yeah, well, you saw our boneyard. We'll have to do a topic on all of them. Another one, I guess it wasn't on this live stream, but Montana Dirt Roads on another one of our videos asked about, maybe it's on our first podcast video, the ZF 5-speed.
ZF 5-speed.
podcast.
I've been getting a lot of messages about those lately, but nobody's ever sent me one. Everybody asks. We got ZF6s, but nobody's just getting messages, but nobody's actually sending them out.
Yeah, the 542s and 547s are pretty popular still. They're, German engineering. They just happen to last a little bit longer with the way they're put together.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, power of the trucks of the day didn't make as much as a Cummins did. So there was that.
Yeah.
But we've got a 547 in mid video right now. It's been on pause actually since before you guys showed up, I think.
Only before I started working here.
Yeah. We've got that. I think that's 547. I think we got a couple 542s. We got a couple of the ZFs. I think we got a 650 and a 750 back there. So yeah, there will be more content for these podcasts talking about stuff.
And then Jesse, whenever you want to pay to send Joel over here, we got G56 stuff. It's ready for its breakdown. Let's see.
I'll send them over for Thanksgiving turkey.
Sweet. That'll work.
Well, I think we can probably call it here. I'm going to go ahead and end the stream.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, everybody, for watching. Next one, I guess we'll do a G56, or I'm sorry, NV5600.
Yeah.
And I'll probably announce our fancy master overhaul kit that I've been talking to you guys about.
Yeah, that'd be cool. And there's plenty to cover that, I've gotten a lot of direct questions stemming from that video, and a lot of people are just calling the shop for tech stuff, so it'd probably be good to address a lot of that. And yeah, we'd love to do it. We really enjoy doing these. We appreciate you having us. Yeah, we started our own, I don't know, it's a shameless plug. We started our own YouTube channel that kind of addresses some technical stuff that we discussed here. So check that out. As problems that we come across, like what we talked about today, we like to document them. Last time we talked about some tools, why I did a thing. We did a quick little blurb about the different tools that we mentioned in there, stuff like that. So yeah, thanks for having us,
See
guys.
what we can come up with on the NV5600.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good. Well, thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you guys, and thanks everyone that watched and submitted some questions.
And thank you, Joe.